The spotlight illusion. You're walking into a room and you trip slightly on the edge of a rug. Your face goes hot. You glance around convinced everyone saw the stumble, that they're replaying it in their heads, maybe even judging you for it. But here's what actually happened. Most people didn't notice. The few who did have already moved on, and yet your brain is running the clip on loop like it's the most notable moment of the afternoon. That gap between what you think people are watching and what they're actually focused on is the spotlight illusion, and it shapes your entire social life without you knowing. The mechanism is dead simple. Your own experience feels enormous to you because you live inside it. You're hyper-aware of every awkward pause you make, every hair out of place, every word that lands weird, so your mind assumes others are equally tuned to you because your vantage point feels like the center of the universe. But everyone else is running the same trick in reverse. They're consumed by their own stumbles, their own perceived failures, their own internal theater. You barely register on their radar because they're too busy worrying that you're judging them. This matters because it's quietly running your choices. You skip raising your hand in a meeting because you believe everyone will think your question is dumb. You avoid starting a conversation because you're sure people find you boring. You replay an offhand comment you made days ago and cringe, certain it created some lasting impression. Meanwhile, the other people involved have genuinely forgotten it happened. They're not rewatching your moments. They're anxious about their own. The escape hatch is small, but real. Next time you're convinced everyone noticed something about you, ask yourself what you can remember about what 3 people around you wore yesterday. The fact that you probably can't remember is the same fact they can't remember about you. Once you feel that mismatch a few times, the spotlight starts to dim. Everyone is watching nobody. You walk into a coffee shop and instinctively scan the room. Your eyes land on a woman reading, a group laughing, someone typing on their laptop. In that half second, you made a calculation. Nobody's looking at me, so I'm safe. But here's what you missed. The woman glanced up when you entered. One of the group saw your shadow cross. The typist registered motion at the edge of their vision. They were all watching, just not consciously. And the moment you looked back, they'd already looked away. This is the paradox of presence. We are constantly observed and constantly invisible, existing in a blind spot of everyone else's attention that we ourselves are creating all the time. The trap is thinking that attention works like a spotlight, that someone is either watching you or they are not. In reality, attention is fragmented, flickering, mostly operating at the edges of awareness. You catch a stranger's face and they catch yours, but you're always a fraction of a second too late to confirm it. So we carry this strange anxiety. We feel seen, but we cannot prove it. This matters because it shapes how you move through the world. You over-monitor your own behavior, assuming the stakes are higher than they are, because somewhere in your lizard brain, you understand that dozens of people registered your existence today without you ever knowing their names. The gift hidden in this pattern is permission. Most people are too busy managing their own invisible threat detection to hold a grudge against you. They were not thinking about your joke yesterday. They did not judge your outfit the way you think they did. They saw you, forgot you, and moved on, usually within seconds. Start noticing how fast faces forget each other, how quickly people return to their own internal world. The paranoia you carry about being watched is almost certainly shared by everyone in that coffee shop, each one alone with it, each one certain they are the only one feeling watched. Familiarity, mistaken for truth. You've heard the same story so many times. Maybe it's a family legend, a claim your industry keeps repeating, or just something everyone at work agrees on, that you stop asking if it's actually true. The repetition itself becomes proof. Your brain doesn't distinguish between "I heard this often" and "I verified this myself." The more you encounter an idea, the more it feels like fact, even if you never once checked the source or looked for counter-evidence. This is the illusory truth effect, and it runs quietly beneath most of our strong convictions. Think about politics, health claims, or even who's lazy in your friend group. The narratives that feel most solid are often just the ones we've heard most frequently, not the ones we've actually examined. The trap deepens because familiarity also triggers comfort. Your brain treats the familiar as safe, and safety signals truth. So, a lie told in a confident voice 3 times in a row doesn't just sound plausible. It feels like home. Advertisers and politicians know this so well they've weaponized it. They repeat a message until your mind stops questioning and starts nodding. The quieter danger is that this happens to you with your own beliefs. You internalize something you half heard years ago, it bounces around your mind unchallenged, and within months, it feels like your own hard-won wisdom. You defend it fiercely Because it's familiar, your confidence grows, while your curiosity shrinks. The more times you've heard it, the less you feel the need to verify it. What matters now is this small, almost secret move. Do I actually know this, or do I just know that I've heard it echoed back to me? That single question, posed gently to yourself in a quiet moment, can crack open a belief you thought was solid and unchangeable. Sometimes it holds after scrutiny, sometimes it crumbles the moment you look closely. Either way, you're back in control of what you choose to believe. Fluency feels like credibility. Someone speaks smoothly about something they know nothing about, and you believe them. Not because the facts check out. You didn't check them, but because the words flowed. There was no stammer, no hedging, no, I think maybe. The confidence was muscular, and the delivery was clean, so your brain did a shortcut. Fluency equals truth. You've probably fallen for this in the last week without noticing. A salesman who talks fast. A friend retelling a story they half remember but nailing the tone perfectly. A podcast host discussing neuroscience with the kind of certainty that makes you assume they've read everything. A TikTok from someone who sounds like they have it figured out. Your instinct is not to interrogate. It is to trust the smoothness itself. This is the fluency heuristic at work, and it runs deeper than you'd think. Your brain loves efficiency, parsing every fact, checking sources, considering counterarguments. That is exhausting. So instead, it uses a proxy. If something is easy to say and easy to follow, it probably came from someone who knows what they are talking about. Easy to understand becomes easy to believe. The trap is that fluency and accuracy have almost nothing to do with each other. A practiced liar is smoother than an honest person stumbling through the truth. A well-rehearsed wrong answer sounds more credible than a hesitant right one. Confidence has never been a good fact-checker. Watch for this in yourself. When someone makes you nod along because they sound certain, pause and ask what you actually know versus what you are just feeling. The person who says, "I'm not entirely sure about this part," is often more trustworthy than the one who powers through without a single crack in the delivery. Fluency is just repetition. Credibility requires something harder. Actually knowing what you are talking about. Next time you find yourself believing someone fast talking, notice that feeling and make it a signal to slow down instead. Mere exposure warmth. There's a person you used to actively dislike, maybe a coworker, a neighbor, someone from your past, and now, when you see them, something's shifted. You don't hate them anymore. Maybe you even smile. Nothing about them changed. You never had a conversation that resolved anything. But somewhere between the 100th and 200th time you crossed paths, your brain quietly rewrote the file. That's mere exposure warmth, and it's running in the background of your life right now, shaping how you feel about people, ideas, and things you can't quite explain. Your brain treats familiarity as a proxy for safety. The more you encounter something without it hurting you, the safer it feels. That's useful when you're learning to trust a new friend or settling into a new home, but it also means you can grow inexplicably fond of things purely because they've been there. Repeated, ambient, never threatening. You're not choosing to like them. Repetition is doing the work. Watch how this plays out. A political candidate runs the same ad 50 times and suddenly polls better, not because anyone was convinced by the argument, but because the face became familiar and therefore felt safer. Your favorite band's new album sounds weird the first listen, but by the 10th replay, you're defending it fiercely. Someone you thought was annoying becomes your inside joke partner just by sitting near you long enough at work. The content doesn't matter as much as the reps. Exposure is the invisible hand, and here's where it gets dangerous. You mistake warmth for truth. You think you like something because you've reasoned yourself into it, because you've thought it through carefully. You haven't. You like it because your reptile brain whispered, "I've seen this before and I'm still alive." The stickier move is noticing when mere exposure is doing the persuading and pausing long enough to ask whether that warmth is actually worth your loyalty, or if you're just running on autopilot. Familiarity is comfortable. That doesn't make it wise. Name, letter, preference. There's something almost embarrassing about this one, but you've almost certainly done it without noticing. Walk into a coffee shop and watch who orders first. A guy named Derek is more likely to become a dentist than a plumber. A woman named Rose gravitates toward real estate. And yes, you'll find more Pauls in construction and plumbing than you'd expect by chance alone. Not because their parents dreamed it, but because they've spent decades seeing their own name, and the brain has quietly filed those letters away as belonging to them. This is called implicit egotism, and it runs so deep that researchers have traced it across careers, cities, even sports. Edith's in editing, Dante in data analysis, people named Georgia moving to Georgia, folks named Florence ending up in Florence. The wild part isn't that people become jobs that start with their name's letter, it's that they don't know they're doing it. Your name is the first word you learn to recognize. It showed up on your birthday cake, your report card, your locker, every piece of mail addressed to you. The letters in it became part of your self-image before you had words for identity at all. So when your brain scans a career, a city, a brand, or a sport, it has a tiny, invisible preference for anything with your letters in it. You feel like it's meant for you, like it fits, and you follow that feeling without question. Here's the part that should make you pause. When researchers traced this pattern backward, they found something strange. The effect was smallest for people who actually hated their names. The moment someone pushed back against that first word they learned, the pull weakened significantly. So next time you make a choice that feels like destiny or pure instinct, ask yourself quietly, am I drawn to this thing or drawn to me? Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not, and catching the difference changes everything. Chameleon mirroring. You walk into a room and immediately notice something strange. A quiet person starts matching your energy, leaning forward when you lean forward, laughing harder when you laugh harder, even adopting the rhythm of your speech. By the end of an hour, you feel like you've known them forever. What you're actually witnessing is a survival skill so old, so hardwired, that most people never notice they're doing it. We mirror because it works. When you see someone copy your posture, your brain reads it as, this person is with me, not against me. It's a subconscious signal of alliance, and it's powerful enough to shift an entire conversation from tension to warmth in minutes. The tricky part is that mirroring isn't always genuine connection. It's sometimes just a strategy. Some people have learned that reflecting others back to themselves is the fastest path to trust, to sales, to getting what they want. Therapists do it intentionally to build rapport. Manipulators do it to lower your guard. The same behavior, opposite intent. And here's where it gets sticky. You probably can't tell the difference in real time. Your brain feels safe around mirroring, so it stops asking questions. You think you're bonding, but you might just be looking at someone who learned the choreography. The sharper move is to notice when mirroring happens, then ask yourself one question. Does this person mirror everyone like this, or just me? Do they have a baseline personality that holds steady, or does it shift depending on who's in the room? Genuine connection includes moments of difference, of disagreement, of edges. Perfect mirroring is often a performance, a careful rehearsal that feels warm, but costs nothing from the person doing it. Once you start watching for it, you'll catch it everywhere. In job interviews, first dates, casual friendships, even your own behavior on days when you're tired and just trying to fit in. That awareness doesn't make you cynical, it just makes you harder to fool. Postural echo. You walk into a coffee shop and spot two people at a corner table, leaning toward each other, chins tilted the same way. One person's shoulder curve mirroring the other's. Nobody told them to do this. Neither one is thinking about posture. Yet their bodies are having a conversation that their mouths haven't caught up to yet. That's postural echo, and it happens so quietly, you miss it unless you're looking, which means you probably miss it most of the time, even though it's running underneath almost every interaction you have. Your body is a translator. It reads the room, reads the other person, and then mirrors them back without asking permission first. When someone leans back, there's a pull in you to create distance too. When they sit forward with intensity, your spine straightens. When they soften their shoulders, you feel permission to do the same. The wild part is that this mirroring isn't just passive. It actually creates connection. Your nervous system begins to sync with theirs. You start breathing at a similar pace. Your heart rate finds rhythm. This is why people say you can feel chemistry with someone. It's real, physiological, happening in real time through your posture before your conscious mind even catches up. But here's where it gets tricky. Postural echo can also trap you. If you're in a room with someone anxious, you absorb that tension without realizing it. If you're with someone closed off and defensive, your own chest might tighten in response. You're not choosing this. It's automatic. So the next time you're in a conversation that feels off or draining, try a small experiment. Notice your shoulders. Notice where your weight is sitting. Are you folding yourself small? Are you leaning away? Your body often knows the truth about a dynamic before your words do. And sometimes, the smallest shift, uncrossing your arms, relaxing your jaw, straightening your spine, can actually change how the other person responds to you. Your posture isn't just reflecting the moment, it's shaping it. Vocal pitch convergence. Next time you're on the phone with someone you really like, pay attention to whether your voice gets a little lighter, a little higher. You might not notice it happening, but your vocal cords are making micro adjustments in real time, matching the pitch of whoever is speaking to you. This isn't a choice. It's your nervous system doing something quiet and automatic to build invisible bridges. When two people genuinely click, their voices start orbiting each other. A therapist drops her voice slightly to match a nervous client. A friend in a good mood unconsciously lifts their register when talking to you. Teachers do it with students they like more. Strangers do it rarely, and people in conflict almost never do it. What makes it stick is that you can hear trust happening before you can hear words themselves. A couple that's genuinely reconnecting will synchronize their speech patterns, speed, rhythm, even vowel sounds, within minutes of sitting down together. But a couple arguing will start diverging, pulling their voices further apart, like two trains leaving the station in opposite directions. It's so reliable that researchers can predict relationship satisfaction by analyzing audio alone, without ever needing to know what the words mean. Nobody teaches you to do this. You're not conscious of it. It just emerges when you feel safe with someone, when your body decides that matching them is worth the tiny effort of reshaping your vocal cords. The catch is that once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Listen to a job interview where the candidate isn't getting the role. Their pitch stays stubbornly high and separate, climbing instead of settling. Listen to best friends mid-conversation. Their voices have almost merged into a duet, breathing the same rhythms. Your voice is broadcasting how much you trust, how much you're lowering your guard, how much you've decided this person is safe enough to echo. The sound of connection is literally you becoming a little bit more like them. Interruption as status claim. Watch a room where someone keeps cutting people off mid-sentence. They do it smoothly, without malice. They lean in, nod, and then launch their own thought before the other person finishes. Most of us read that as rudeness, but that person isn't trying to be rude. They're claiming real estate. They're saying, my ideas matter enough that I don't have to wait. My thoughts are worth the air they take up right now. Interruption is a status move, and it works because the room often lets it work. Think about the last meeting you sat in. Who talked over whom? Not randomly, right? It usually ran the same direction. The person who interrupted was in some way higher on the social ladder, either by rank, confidence, or because everyone already expected them to have the loud voice. Here is what gets sticky. Interruption trains people. When someone regularly breaks into your sentences, you actually start speaking faster, more defensively, with less conviction. Your brain learns that your words don't have a protected space, and the interrupter gets rewarded by the room staying quiet after they speak, which reinforces the whole loop. This is how power distributes itself in small groups, not through grand declarations, but through tiny, repeated claims on who gets heard. Women interrupt less often than men in mixed groups, and it's not because they're politer. It's because they've learned the cost is higher if they claim that space. Same with people from marginalized groups in predominantly white rooms, or junior employees in senior-heavy meetings. They're reading the room correctly. The patterns usually stick. Now here is the small, useful part. Next time someone interrupts you, notice not just that it happened, but also who else is watching and what happens next. Does the room correct it? Does anyone else speak up? Or does everyone silently accept that this person's words matter more? That small observation teaches you something real about who actually holds space in that group, regardless of what anyone's title says. Eye contact as dominance. Walk into a room where two people are competing for respect, and you'll see a subtle staring contest that nobody acknowledges. The one who holds the gaze wins. The one who looks away first loses. It's not about rudeness or aggression most of the time. It's about who gets to define the space. Eye contact is a claim. It says, I'm not afraid of you. I'm worth looking at. I belong here. When you maintain it, you're telling the other person you're unbothered by their presence. When you break first, you're conceding that they matter more. This shows up everywhere if you know what to watch for. In job interviews, the candidate who locks eyes for just a touch longer gets remembered as confident, even if everything else they said was forgettable. In arguments with your partner, whoever stops meeting the other's eyes usually feels the shift in power first. They're the one who becomes uncomfortable. Salespeople learn early that breaking eye contact makes you look evasive, so they train themselves to hold it, and it genuinely works. Your brain reads that as truthfulness and ease. But here's where it gets complicated. In some cultures and contexts, intense eye contact isn't dominance. It's disrespect. It reads as a threat, so the same tool that signals confidence in a boardroom in New York might signal aggression in a conversation with an elder in another part of the world. Status matters too. If you're speaking to someone with actual power over you, holding their gaze too long becomes a challenge, not confidence. Your nervous system reads it as risky. The sticky part is that most of us don't know we're doing this. You're not thinking about dominance when you're locked in someone's eyes. You're just experiencing a feeling: safety or unsafety, trust or distrust, submission or control. But if you start noticing who holds and who breaks, you'll begin seeing the invisible pecking order everywhere. Meetings, casual conversations. The moment someone's eyes drift, watch what happens next. Territorial anchoring in space. Walk into any coffee shop and watch where people sit. Not randomly. That regular in the corner by the window has claimed that spot like a homeowner claims their living room. You might not think much of it, but what you're watching is your brain doing something primal. It's drawing invisible lines around a patch of earth and saying, "This is mine," and something in your nervous system relaxes when you're inside that boundary. This is territorial anchoring. And it runs deeper than we admit. The longer you occupy a space, the more your brain treats it as an extension of yourself. Your desk at work, your side of the bed, the chair you always take at the dinner table. These aren't just locations, they're anchors for your sense of control and identity. When someone sits in your chair or moves your things, you don't just feel inconvenienced, you feel invaded. Your amygdala lights up a little. It's a real physiological response, not pure nostalgia or annoyance. Here's what gets strange. People are measurably more creative and relaxed in spaces they've anchored themselves to, but also more defensive about those spaces, more likely to dismiss ideas from people outside their territory, more prone to seeing that corner as theirs, and therefore as containing their wisdom, their style, their way. Move someone to an unfamiliar chair in a meeting, and their contributions often shrink. The territory wasn't just comfortable, it was making them bolder. But the trap is this: you start believing the space created your confidence, when really, you just feel safer there. What's worth paying attention to is noticing where you naturally plant yourself and how much of your boldness is actually rooted in the space itself, not in you. Because the moment you realize your territorial anchor is just a habit, not a birthright, you're free to work well anywhere. The space doesn't own you. You just borrowed its sense of safety, and now you can carry that feeling wherever you go, which means your actual power travels with you, not the other way around. Cue psychology. Think about the last time you stood in line at a coffee shop or a checkout and felt someone standing too close behind you. That physical discomfort isn't just preference. It's your nervous system reading a threat signal in a space that's meant to be neutral and orderly. Cues are one of those rare places where strangers agree to follow invisible rules, and the moment someone breaks them, you feel it in your chest. What fascinates researchers is how much our behavior in cues reveals about fairness, trust, and our ability to suppress impulse in public. You will stand still for 30 minutes if you believe the line is progressing fairly, but let someone cut in front or watch the barista ignore the next person in line, and your entire nervous system shifts into indignation. The cue becomes a tiny moral stage. We're not just waiting, we're watching to see if the system respects us. And here's the sticky part. People will often wait longer in a queue they perceive as fair than they will tolerate a shorter wait in a system they feel is unfair. It's not about the time, it's about whether you believe your turn will come. This is why theme parks redesigned their lines to loop and wind, not actually to make waits shorter, but to make the invisible progress visible. You see the line ahead of you, you see movement, and your brain releases the tension. It's also why people get furious when someone jumps the line, even if it doesn't actually affect when you leave. It's not about the 30 seconds you lose, it's about the implied message that the rules don't apply equally. The cue is where we practice cooperating with strangers under stress. When that contract breaks, it hits differently than most social violations because it happens in public, and everyone watching becomes a witness to whether fairness still matters. Next time you're waiting, notice where your eyes go, usually toward whoever might break the agreement first. Reciprocity debt. Someone buys you coffee once, and suddenly you feel the weight of it. Not because the coffee cost much, but because your brain has registered a tab that needs settling. This is reciprocity debt. The invisible ledger we all keep running, where every favor, every small kindness, every bit of attention creates an obligation that sits in your chest until you repay it. It's wired so deep that you feel it before you think about it, and that's exactly why it works so well on us. You watch your colleagues stay late to help with your project, and now you owe them. A friend texts you 3 times a week for 2 months, and you start feeling guilty for not matching their energy. A company gives you something free, a sample, a trial, a low price to start, and you feel the pull to buy. The mechanism is simple. We are creatures of balance, and imbalance feels uncomfortable, like a debt hanging over us. So we move to close the gap, almost without deciding to. Here's where it gets tricky. This instinct isn't bad. Reciprocity is one of the glues that holds relationships together, that builds trust, that makes community possible. But it's also one of the easiest levers to pull if you want to move someone without them noticing. Salespeople know this. Gift givers know this. People who want something from you know this. They give first, small and genuine, and then your own brain does the work of making you feel obligated. The thing is, reciprocity debt operates on a different timeline in different relationships. A close friend can rack up a huge imbalance, and it feels fine. You trust the balance will even out over years. A stranger creates debt that feels urgent to repay immediately. So the next time you feel that tug, that sense that you owe something, pause long enough to ask whether the debt is real or whether someone else's hand is on the scale. Foot in the door escalation. You agree to fill out a quick survey. 10 minutes in, they're asking for your email. By the end, somehow you've signed up for a newsletter you didn't really want and a free trial that'll bill you in 30 days. Nobody tricked you into anything illegal, but you also didn't plan to get here. It's foot in the door escalation, and it works because of something almost boring. Consistency. The moment you've said yes to a small thing, your brain wants the next small thing to make sense with the first one. It's not manipulation, so much as it's how your own mind protects itself from feeling like a flip-flopper. The genius of this pattern is that each step feels weightless. Signing up for the survey isn't a commitment. Adding an email feels fair. You get insights, they get contact info, seems balanced. Then the trial is free, so what's the harm? Your resistance drops at each gate because you're not looking at the final destination. You're looking at the current ask, and it matches what you already agreed to. By the time you've spent 20 minutes with a brand, you have a relationship with it, not because the brand earned one, but because your brain is now invested in being consistent with the person you've already shown yourself to be. Here's what makes it stick. The pattern works on you, even when you're aware of it. Charities use this. Employers use this. Marketing depends on it. The trick isn't paranoia about small asks. That'll exhaust you. The trick is noticing when you're being walked down a path versus choosing one. Before you say yes to anything free or easy, ask what the next likely ask will be and whether you'd want to live inside that ending. Not to be cynical, but to see the whole shape before your consistency instinct locks in. That single pause, that moment of looking ahead instead of just down, stops most escalation before it starts rolling. Door-in-the-face retreat. You ask your roommate if they'll help you move next Saturday. They laugh and say, absolutely not. They've got plans, they're exhausted, the whole thing feels like too much. Rejected. But then you pause and add, well, would you at least help me load the truck for a few hours in the morning? Suddenly they soften. Yeah, okay, I can do that. What just happened is the opposite of what feels true. By asking for something bigger first and then retreating to something smaller, you made the smaller ask feel reasonable by contrast. It's called the door-in-the-face technique, and it works because of how your brain measures fairness and effort. When someone says no to a big request, they feel bad about it. That little guilt sits there. Then when you offer the smaller version, their mind does a quick calculation. It's less than what you originally asked, so saying yes feels like a compromise, like they're being generous. They're not calculating the absolute burden anymore. They're calculating the difference between the two asks. You see this everywhere once you notice it. Charities ask for a $100 monthly donation, and when you hesitate, they ask for $20 instead. Suddenly, 20 feels manageable, even generous. A colleague asks to borrow your laptop for the whole project. You say no, then they ask just for one afternoon. You agree before you've really thought it through. The retreat makes the actual request feel smaller than it is because it's being measured against the phantom bigger one. The tricky part is that this works even when you know it's happening. Your roommate might be aware they're being gently manipulated manipulated, but the contrast still pulls at them. The guilt still sits there. It's not a trick that requires stupidity. It's just how our fairness radar works. So watch for when someone leads with a huge ask and then quickly retreats. Sometimes they're testing your boundaries, sometimes they're genuinely calibrating, but sometimes they know exactly what they're doing. The pratfall effect. There's a moment in every friendship when someone you admire trips on nothing, spills coffee down their shirt, or laughs so hard they snort, and something shifts. They become real, more likable, somehow, despite the mess. That small human failure is the pratfall effect, and it's the reason perfection makes people keep their distance, while vulnerability brings them closer. We are drawn to people who make mistakes, because mistakes are proof they're not robots sent to judge us, and that permission is magnetic. Think about the people you love most. They're not the ones with perfect lives. They're the ones who've tripped in front of you and then laughed at themselves instead of pretending it didn't happen. Now flip it. You know those polished, error-free people who make you feel small, the ones who never fumble a word, never show doubt, never ask for help. Your brain reads that as dangerous, not trustworthy, possibly hiding something. The paradox is that being flawless makes you less persuasive, less connected, less safe to others. But there's a trap inside this truth worth noticing. The pratfall effect only works if people already respect you. If you're starting from zero credibility, a failure reads as just that. Failure. So a CEO who admits she was wrong seems human and wise. A junior employee who makes the same admission seems incompetent. The effect depends on foundation. It also depends on how you handle it. If you stumble and blame the stairs, it backfires. If you stumble and own it with something close to humor, it works. The magic isn't in the mistake. It's in what you do with it afterward. There's also a quieter version of this that plays out in how you present yourself to new people. Show too much competence too fast, and you create distance. Show vulnerability before you've earned trust, and you create suspicion. Timing matters, context matters. The slip has to feel genuine, not calculated. Next time you catch yourself trying to look perfect, ask whether that's really what's bringing people closer to you, or pushing them away. The Ben Franklin effect. There's a person in your life you're not sure about. Maybe someone new at work, or someone you've been cordial with but never quite warmed to. Now imagine asking them for a small favor, not a huge ask, but something real enough that it costs them a little time or thought. Here's the weird part. After they do it, they'll probably like you more. Benjamin Franklin noticed this in himself. He had a rival in the Pennsylvania Assembly, someone he wrote off as impossible. Instead of trying harder to befriend the man directly, Franklin asked to borrow a rare book from his personal library. The rival sent it over. When Franklin returned it with a polite note, the relationship shifted. They went from antagonistic to friendly. Franklin's own words. When you ask someone for a favor, you give them an opportunity to believe they like you. It sounds backward because it is. Our brains don't like contradiction. If you do something kind for someone, especially something that takes effort, your mind rushes in to explain why you did it. You must like them, otherwise, why would you have helped? So you revise your entire mental picture of that person upward, almost automatically. This isn't manipulation exactly, it's just how we construct meaning. The catch is that it works best when the favor is voluntary and somewhat costly. A 2-second task doesn't trigger the effect, but asking someone to think through a real problem, or sharing something they value, or spending genuine time, that's the kind of ask that makes their brain work to justify why they said yes. The next time you're stuck with someone's resistance, try inverting the usual playbook. Instead of trying to get them to like you first, give them a reason to do something small but genuine for you. Then watch how their mind catches up to their own actions. People are far more loyal to what they've already decided to do. Halo bleed. You hire a brilliant engineer who seems perfect for the role. 3 months in, she makes a careless error on a small project, something that catches everyone's attention. What happens next tells you everything about how your brain takes shortcuts and refuses to let go. Most teams will forgive it because she's the brilliant engineer, right? Her reputation is so bright that one mistake just doesn't stick. It gets filed away as an exception, a bad day, something out of character. But swap the scenario. Hire someone average, and that exact same error becomes proof they were never the right fit. This is halo bleed. When one strong trait, or reputation, or first impression bleeds into how you judge everything else about that person, for better or worse, the halo glows bright enough to cast shade over actual evidence. Think about the attractive person who gets away with interrupting in meetings, while the quiet person who does the same same thing, looks rude, or the charismatic CEO whose terrible decisions get called visionary, while a quieter manager's identical choices get called reckless. Your brain is lazy in a specific way. It bins people into buckets and keeps them there. Once you've decided someone is competent, generous, or trustworthy, contradictory information has to work twice as hard to land. The flip side is darker. Once someone is in the bad bucket, a single positive action barely moves the needle. You've already written the story and locked the door. Here's where it gets sticky. You can't logic your way out of this by deciding to be fair. The halo effect is automatic. Your conscious mind comes late to the party, but you can design friction into your judgment. Before you write someone off or excuse someone's mistakes, ask yourself what you'd think if it came from someone else entirely, someone without the reputation that's been burning. That tiny reframe isn't perfect, but it's enough to crack the bucket open and let some light in. Horn effect contamination. You meet someone who flubs a presentation, gets rejected from a school, crashes their car, and suddenly that single crack is all you see. Not just in that moment, but everywhere. They must not be smart. They must be careless. They must be unlucky. Without meaning to, you start filtering every future interaction through that lens, as if one failure has permanently stained the entire person. That's the Horn effect, and it works like invisible ink, turning one dark spot into a shadow that falls across everything else they do. The halo effect's evil twin. The Horn effect takes one negative trait or experience and bleeds it across the whole picture. A musician shows up late and becomes undisciplined in every area. A coworker makes one awkward joke and they're the socially weird one forever. You don't see the 1,000 things they do right. The negative defines them in your mind with a weight that drowns everything else out. That single bad moment becomes the master narrative and everything else gets interpreted through it. Here's where it gets insidious. Once you've tagged someone with that mark, you actively hunt for evidence that confirms it. When they do something good, you minimize it or chalk it up to luck. When they stumble again, which everyone does, you nod to yourself, like you knew it all along. The effect doesn't just contaminate how you see them. It hijacks how you interpret their actions going forward. Confirmation bias and the Horn effect work together, both keeping that first negative impression locked in place. This happens unconsciously. Automatically. You're not lying to yourself on purpose. Your brain is just pattern matching too aggressively, using that one incident as a stand-in for character itself. The next time you catch yourself writing someone off because of a single bad moment, pause and ask what you actually know about them versus what you've inferred from one thing. That distinction might save you from dismissing someone who could genuinely matter to you. Contrast effect judgment. You walk into a restaurant after spending the afternoon in a chain coffee shop, and suddenly, the house wine tastes exceptional. A week later, same wine, different context. You're leaving a sommelier's tasting at a winery, and it tastes thin and forgettable. Nothing about the wine changed. What changed is the thing right before it. Your brain doesn't rate experiences on absolute scales. It rates them against whatever came just before, and that shift in anchor point warps everything that follows. This is the contrast effect, and it's running silent underneath so many of your judgments that you'll start spotting it constantly once you see it clearly. A candidate seems brilliant in an interview, partly because the previous 3 were mediocre. A partner seems more attentive after a stretch of distance. A hotel room feels luxurious or cramped, depending on what you saw in the lobby photos before you booked. The real trap is that you'll feel certain about your assessment in each moment, completely unaware that your baseline just moved. Your judgment isn't faulty. It's context-dependent in ways your conscious mind doesn't register, and that blindness makes it stick harder. This gets darker when you think about salary negotiations, dating, or job performance reviews. If you interview for a promotion right after watching a peer stumble in a meeting, you naturally appear sharper by comparison. If you're evaluated on a day when your colleagues delivered weak work, your average effort looks exceptional. Restaurants and retail companies know this cold. They stack the deck by showing you the worst options first, watching your satisfaction spike when you land on something slightly better. The move here isn't to become immune to contrast. That's impossible. And fighting your own neurology wastes energy. It's to pause before major judgments and ask what came immediately before. What was my anchor? Could I be seeing this differently if the sequence were reversed? That small friction point between decision and assessment is where you catch the effect red-handed and where you start making choices based on what something actually is, not just how it compares to the shadow of whatever came before. Anchoring on first numbers. You walk into a store and see a jacket marked down from $399 to $199. It feels like a steal, right? Your brain has already locked onto that original price as gospel, even though you have zero idea if anyone ever actually paid it. That $319 isn't a fact. It's a number someone chose to drop first, and it hijacked your judgment before you knew what was happening. The trap is perfectly legal, perfectly common, and works regardless of whether you know it's coming. When you encounter a number early in any negotiation, comparison, or valuation, it becomes your mental reference point. Everything you judge after that gets measured against it, like it's true north on a compass. A realtor mentions the previous asking price for a house. A salary negotiation opens with one figure. A used car dealer plasters original manufacturer's suggested retail price in letters you can't ignore. You think you're being rational, but you're really just anchoring to whatever arrived first, then making tiny adjustments from there, as if you're searching for truth when you're actually just moving around one person's starting position. The wild part is that even when researchers tell people the anchor is completely random or manipulative, it still works. Knowing doesn't free you from it. That anchor shapes how much you think things should cost, what you believe you're worth, and how you evaluate every offer without realizing the invisible frame around your thinking. A salary from months ago becomes the anchor for your next negotiation. A price you glimpsed once lingers as your reference point for years. Your first impression of someone becomes the anchor coloring every interaction after. When you're about to make any significant judgment, especially anything involving money, value, or stakes, pause and ask what number or fact you're measuring everything else against. Where did that anchor actually come from? Who wins if you believe it? Sometimes naming it aloud is enough to loosen its grip and let you think in a slightly wider space. Decoy option steering. Walk into a movie theater and the ticket clerk asks what size popcorn you want. Small, medium, or large. Sounds simple until you realize something. There is no small. What they called small is actually a medium-sized container, and the medium is absurdly huge, and the large is almost a joke. By the time you're done comparing, medium feels reasonable, maybe even smart. You just got steered. The small was never meant to exist. It was built just so medium would look good next to it. That fake option is the decoy, and it's everywhere. Netflix shows you 3 plan tiers: basic, standard, premium. Basic is so stripped down, it makes standard look like an obvious win. Your car dealer shows you 3 models: the bare bones one with no features, the mid-range with everything, and the luxury model. Mid-range suddenly looks perfect. Dating apps pull the same move, show you 3 people, make one deliberately unattractive, and suddenly your actual choice feels smarter than it is. Even restaurants do this. A small entree, a regular, and a shareable feast. Suddenly, regular doesn't feel gluttonous anymore. The magic isn't that you're being lied to about the real options. It's that your brain is being anchored to which one looks best by comparison. You're excellent at comparing things side by side, but terrible at knowing what you actually value in isolation. Add a bad option, and you'll chase the middle one without even noticing. The thing that makes this sticky is that you still feel like you chose. You weren't forced. You compared. You decided. Except the menu itself was designed to push you toward a predetermined answer. Your sense of agency stays intact while your behavior gets quietly reshaped. What matters now is the pause. Next time you're offered 3 choices, ask yourself whether that worst option really exists in the world or whether someone just built it to make the middle path look like home. Pay attention to which choice disappears. When the decoy vanishes, that's where the real steering happened. Framing flips preference. A surgeon tells you the surgery has a 90% survival rate, and you nod, relieved. The same surgeon, different patient, same surgery, same odds, but this time they say 10% of patients don't survive. Suddenly the risk feels massive, even though mathematically nothing changed. Your brain just heard a different story, and that story is the frame, bending your choice like light through a prism. Here's where it gets strange. Frames don't just change how you feel about a decision. They can completely flip what you actually want. Show someone a gamble framed as potential gains, and they play it safe. Frame the exact same numbers as potential losses, and they suddenly bet hard, chasing what they're afraid of losing. Your preferences aren't locked in somewhere deep. They're sitting on the surface, waiting for language to rearrange them. A job described as 90% safe feels solid and trustworthy. The same job described as 10% risk feels volatile and shaky. A product marketed as 10% more toothpaste than competitors sounds different from 20% less waste than competitors, even if if they're the exact same advantage. Your wallet opens differently, depending on whose story you heard first. A medical treatment with a 1 in 1,000 chance of side effects hits differently than a 99.9% safety rate, and yet they're mathematically identical twins. The trap is that frames feel invisible. You think you've decided based on facts, but you've actually decided based on which wall of the room the spotlight landed on. The facts were always there. The frame just chose which ones to light up and which to leave dark. You can't think without frames, but you can get suspicious when someone's framing matters more than their numbers. Ask yourself what the other angle would look like. What would change if the story flipped? That pause, that one question, is usually enough to catch the frame doing its work before it decides for you. Default option: inertia. You probably don't remember choosing your phone plan, your email provider, or the health insurance your company assigned you. That's not because you have a bad memory. It's because you didn't really choose them. They were just there, and the friction of switching was higher than the friction of staying, so you stayed. This is default option inertia, and it runs your life more than you'd like to admit. When a choice has a preset answer already waiting for you, most of us will take it, even if a better option exists just one click away. Not because we're lazy exactly, but because our brains treat already selected as a mild form of endorsement. It feels like someone else already vetted it. Changing it feels like admitting the original choice was wrong, and that small psychological weight keeps us in place. Here's where it gets darker. Companies know this intimately. Browser settings default to letting advertisers track you. Phone updates default to sharing your location with corporate partners. Subscription services default to auto-renewal, billing your card month after month. The default isn't neutral, it's a choice that was made for you, disguised as no choice at all. Because you never actively selected it, you never actively question it either. The moment you do question it, when you finally check that dusty settings page buried 3 menus deep, you often find something you'd have explicitly rejected if you'd been paying attention in the first place. The move here isn't to second-guess every preset in your life. That would exhaust you into paralysis. Instead, get curious about the decisions you're not making. Once a year, audit the 3 or 4 things running on autopilot: insurance coverage, forgotten subscriptions, email filters that silently sort your life. Ask yourself one honest question. If this weren't already selected, would I choose it now? That single question, asked deliberately a few times a year, is enough to stop the current from carrying you places you didn't actually want to go. Choice overload paralysis. You stand in front of the streaming menu for 7 minutes trying to pick a show. 7 minutes, nothing's playing. You just can't move. The problem isn't that there's nothing good, it's that there's everything. 100 paths, and the moment you choose one, you're giving up 99 others, and something in your brain treats that like a real loss. Welcome to the paradox of abundance. More options should feel like freedom, but instead, they feel like a trap with very polite walls. The psychologist Barry Schwartz calls this the paradox of choice, and it hits different the more options you have. When there were 5 cereals at the store, you just grabbed one. When there are 70, you start spinning. Your brain gets tangled in comparison mode, thinking about which option you're foregoing, what the perfect choice would look like, whether you're settling, whether someone else would pick smarter. It's not rational, but it's real. And here's where it gets sticky. The paralysis doesn't just happen with small things. You see it in career decisions. People not applying for jobs because there are too many possible jobs, or not switching because the options feel overwhelming. You see it in relationships. People scrolling for the one while someone solid sits right there because somewhere in the noise of infinite choice, they've lost the ability to commit to actual humans who are actually imperfect. You see it in education, in travel planning, in every corner where abundance used to be scarcity. The quiet damage is that you end up doing nothing instead of something imperfect, which is way worse than any wrong move. What actually moves you forward isn't finding the perfect option. It's deciding what matters enough to stop looking. Set one real constraint: time, price, or a single non-negotiable value, and watch the paralysis evaporate. Your brain doesn't want infinite choice. It wants permission to stop searching, a clear reason to say no to everything else. Give it that permission, and you'll move. Loss aversion asymmetry. You know that feeling when you find $20 in your coat pocket versus the one when you realize you lost $20. The loss hits harder, right? Almost double the sting of the gain's pleasure. That gap, that asymmetry, is foundational to how you make decisions, spend money, stay in relationships, relationships, and avoid risk. Your brain is wired to treat losses and gains as fundamentally different experiences on entirely different scales. A loss is not just the opposite of a gain, it's worse. Much worse. The real trouble starts when you begin living inside that asymmetry without naming it. If you fear losing $10 more than you'd enjoy winning $10, you become conservative in ways that quietly cost you everything you actually want. You hold on to bad jobs, mediocre relationships, and hoarded possessions because letting go feels catastrophic, even when holding on is the actual waste. You avoid negotiating a raise because rejection stings worse than the certainty of staying underpaid. You skip a bold opportunity because the downside feels vivid and the upside feels abstract. The trap deepens because loss aversion compounds over time. You make smaller and smaller moves, protect what you have, and never test what you could build. Years pass and you realize you've been running from ghosts instead of running toward anything real. The sticky part is that your loss aversion was useful once. In scarcity, losing your shelter or status meant death. Gaining extra resources meant survival. Your fear was perfectly calibrated for stakes that no longer exist, but the emotional wiring stayed. Now, it just keeps you small, protecting nothing but your own inertia. You're so afraid of losing what you have that you never risk building what matters. The next time you're making a choice, ask yourself this: am I moving towards something I want or just away from the pain of loss? That single question shifts where the real decision lives, and it's often enough to crack the spell. Endowment ownership premium. You bought a mug for $3 last week. Today someone offers you $5 and you feel an immediate no rising in your chest. Not because it's beautiful or because you use it constantly, but because now that it belongs to you, parting with it feels like a loss. This is the endowment effect, and it runs your life more than you realize. The moment something becomes yours, your brain assigns it invisible value that has almost nothing to do with what the object is actually worth in the world. This hits hardest where it matters most: your home, your car, your job, your ideas. You pitch a half-formed concept in a meeting, and now it's yours. When someone critiques it, the sting lands differently than criticism of someone else's proposal. That house you've lived in for 2 years, you'll ask more for it than a comparable place down the street because you've woven a story inside those walls, mixed memory with property. Real estate agents know this. Ownership has rewritten the math in your head in ways you can't see. The deeper trap is that ownership makes you blind to alternatives. You hold stock longer than you should because selling feels like admitting failure. You sink money into saving a business because walking away feels like surrender, not strategy. The pain of losing what you own is nearly twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining the equivalent. And that asymmetry keeps you anchored to things you should probably shed. Most people miss how this plays out in commitments too. You stay in situations longer simply because you've already invested time or emotion, and walking away feels like erasing what you've built rather than protecting what comes next. Before you decide something is non-negotiable or unsellable, ask yourself honestly, would you buy it today at its actual price? Would you choose it fresh? If the answer is no, ownership has clouded your judgment, and you're paying an invisible tax to keep something the world values far less than your feelings do. Status quo defense. You know that feeling when someone suggests you change something small: your morning routine, your route to work, the way you've arranged your office. And suddenly, you feel irritated, not because the idea is bad, but because it's different. That friction you feel is status quo bias in real time, and it runs deeper than mere habit. Your brain treats the current state as a kind of baseline reality, a safe harbor it has already mapped. Anything that requires you to move from that harbor, even towards something objectively better, triggers a small internal alarm. The current way forward doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels like home, and home is always defended. Here's where it gets tricky. Status quo bias doesn't whisper reasons to you. It just makes the familiar feel good and the unknown feel risky, sometimes catastrophically so. A company keeps an inefficient system in place for years because we know how it works. You stay in a friendship that drains you because ending it feels scarier than the slow damage. A workplace culture stays toxic because that's just how things are here. A relationship persists past its expiration date because dissolving it feels harder than enduring it. The pattern isn't logic, it's emotional. The status quo carries the weight of sunk time, invested effort, and identity. You've already paid the price to build it, so abandoning it feels like admitting that price was wasted. Every day you stay compounds the feeling that staying was right, even when your gut knows better. The real move is recognizing that your comfort with the current state isn't evidence that it's good. It's just evidence that it's current. Ask yourself, if you were starting fresh today, would you choose this? Not whether you'd upend things dramatically, but whether this particular path is one you'd actually pick if friction didn't exist. That question cuts through the defense. It doesn't make change easy, but it stops you from mistaking the familiar for the optimal. Zero-risk preference. When you're faced with a choice between a sure thing and something bigger but riskier, notice what your gut does before your brain gets involved. Most people feel a pull towards certainty that has almost nothing to do with logic. A guaranteed small payoff feels safer than a probable larger one, even when the math says otherwise. That gravitational pull towards zero risk is not weakness. It is ancient survival wiring that got your ancestors through winters by keeping them from gambling on hunts they might lose. The problem is that wiring still runs today in situations where it sabotages you. You stay in a job that pays decently but bores you senseless because the alternative, starting your own thing, has risk attached. You don't pitch that idea to your boss because rejection feels more real than the upside. You don't invest in your future because the market could drop. You turn down the chance to move cities for a better life because at least here you know the bad parts. The mathematician inside you would say, if the expected value favors the riskier choice, take it. But you are not a mathematician. You are an animal that hates losing more than it loves winning. Losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent wins feel good. So your nervous system naturally gravitates toward arrangements where nothing gets taken away, even if nothing gets added either. Here is what shifts it. Start separating certainty from safety. A zero-risk choice is often just slow harm wearing a familiar face. Staying in a suffocating situation is not safe. It is a slow leak. Taking the calculated risk, the one you have thought through, where you understand what you can actually lose, is sometimes the safer play for your actual life. The move is not to ignore your caution. It is to ask yourself whether you are avoiding risk or avoiding change. They feel identical, but they are not. Denominator, neglect. You see a headline. 5 people got cancer this year from our neighborhood. Scary, right? Your stomach tightens. But then someone asks, how many people actually live here? 2,000? 5,000? Suddenly the 5 doesn't feel the same. That's denominator neglect, when we grab the number that scares us and forget to ask what it's really a part of. We're numerically illiterate in a way that costs us sleep and feeds our paranoia. Your brain is built to notice the 5. It is not built to divide. A coffee brand announces it found dangerous levels of a chemical in their product. You stop buying it, but dangerous compared to what? Compared to what you're already exposed to in tap water? In the air? The news rarely tells you. So you panic about the one thing you heard a number for and ignore the 10 things already quietly killing you. This happens in medicine constantly. A drug reduces your risk by 50%. Sounds miraculous until you learn the baseline risk was 2% to begin with. 50% of 2 is still just 1, but the denominator stays invisible and you feel saved by a miracle. Here's where it gets darker. Once you see this pattern, you notice how often it's used on purpose. A company highlights how many customers love their product without mentioning how many were surveyed. A politician boasts about job creation without telling you the full picture, how many jobs were lost or what the population grew by. A startup claims their app saved users millions of hours. Hours doing what? Compared to what alternative? The real world runs on ratios, not raw numbers. And when only the numerator gets your attention, someone else is doing the math for you. The antidote is almost mundane. Always ask the other number. What's the whole? What's the base? When you do, the scary shrinks, the impressive deflates. You start seeing how much of what feels true is just an incomplete equation. Base rate blindness. You read a headline. New miracle supplement cures insomnia in 87% of users. Your tired brain perks up. You don't think about how many people tried it total, or what percentage of insomniacs get better without any supplement at all. You just see 87% and feel hope. That's base rate blindness, ignoring the actual likelihood of something before you pile on new information. The base rate is the starting point. The ground truth of how often this thing happens in real life, and we're almost allergic to it. Your friend mentions she knows a pilot who crashed a plane. Suddenly flying feels dangerous to you, even though pilots are statistically safer drivers than most people on the road. The story overwrites the statistics, or you hear one story about someone getting sick from a vaccine. Your mind spins it up loud while silent background noise, millions who didn't get sick, stays invisible. A therapist tells you they specialize in treating depression and seem confident, warm, impressive. You don't ask, how many clients actually improve with this person versus the average? What's the baseline recovery rate for depression on its own? These questions feel clinical, cold, like you're doubting their competence. But you're not. You're just trying to see clearly. Here's where this gets sticky. You meet someone who fits a stereotype. Confident, fast-talking, and someone whispers, that's a classic sign of being a con artist. Now you're watching them differently, searching for proof. But most confident, fast-talking people are just confident and fast-talking. The base rate of con artists in any random room is tiny. The story your mind built is way louder than the actual odds. What makes this so hard to fight is that one vivid example, the pilot crash, the sick person, the slick talker, creates a feeling that drowns out the boring spreadsheet of what actually happens to most people. Your nervous system doesn't do math. It does memory, and memory is a spotlight, not a survey. Start noticing when you skip the boring question, how often does this actually happen to most people? Before the headline, before the story, before the feeling, that question is where clarity lives. Availability, heuristic vividness. You see a plane crash on the news at night, and for the next week, boarding a flight feels terrifying. Statistically, you know you're safer in the air than in your car, but knowing doesn't touch the feeling. That disconnect between what you know and what your gut screams is availability, heuristic vividness at work, and it's steering your choices in ways you probably don't realize. Your brain has a shortcut that goes like this. If something is easy to picture or recall, it must be more common or dangerous or important than it probably is. A vivid image, smoke, twisted metal, news anchors speaking seriously, makes that thing feel real in a way that statistics never will. So plane crashes loom large, even though you're more likely to be injured driving to the airport. Shark attacks feel plausible after watching a thriller, even in freshwater lakes. A friend's dramatic breakup becomes proof that commitment is doomed when most relationships around you are quietly stable. The vividness isn't random either. News outlets love visceral, emotional stories because they're sticky. Your brain loves them for the same reason. Together, they create this echo chamber where the most memorable things feel like the most important or likely things. And because your memory works in images and feelings rather than numbers, you navigate the world according to what sticks, not what matters. The trap gets tighter when you notice it in other people first. Someone's irrational fear of flying, their sudden paranoia about a health condition they just read about, their conviction that the world is more dangerous than ever. You see the heuristic happening and feel smart, but your own vividly remembered moment, your own easily pictured scenario, is reshaping your choices right now in ways you're not catching. The quieter move is to notice when something feels urgent or risky, then ask, am I reacting to how vivid this is, or to how likely it actually is? Sometimes those line up. Often, they don't. Recency waiting. Your partner cancels dinner plans once, and suddenly, they don't care about you anymore. Your boss gives you feedback on a single messy project, and you're convinced you're about to be fired. A friend doesn't text back for a few hours, and the entire history of your friendship feels suspect. This is recency waiting. The pull of what just happened is so strong it drowns out everything that came before. Your brain treats the most recent signal like a full rewrite of the story, even when the evidence doesn't support it. Think about job interviews. The candidate who speaks last stays fresher in the hiring committee's mind than someone equally qualified who went first, not because they were better, but because their voice is still warm in the room. Or consider how you feel about a restaurant after one bad meal when you've eaten there 50 times and loved it. That single burnt steak becomes the summary, the thing you remember when someone asks if you like the place. Your neural machinery is wired this way for a reason. Fresh information might be urgent, might shift your survival calculus right now, but in modern life, where most threats aren't immediate, this bias becomes a trap. You update your entire sense of a person, a job, a plan based on yesterday's mood rather than the aggregate of months. And here's the sticky part. Recency waiting makes you feel certain about these snap judgments. It doesn't feel like bias. It feels like clarity, like you're finally seeing the truth. The pattern to notice is when your mind suddenly pivots hard on something important. When you catch yourself saying, I guess they never really, or I think this is actually Pause there. Look back further than the last week. Ask what you'd believe if last Tuesday had never happened. The longest view you have access to is almost always more honest than the one you're having right now. And the next time you feel that rush of certainty after one fresh piece of bad news, that's your cue. Your recency bias is probably running the show. Illusory correlation. You meet someone with red hair who's rude to a waiter, and suddenly red hair means hot-tempered. You notice your friend cancels plans whenever it rains, so now rain equals flakiness. Reality is that you've probably met dozens of kind redheads and seen your friend show up plenty of times in sunshine, but those moments don't stick because they don't match the pattern you've already decided exists. That mismatch gets filed away as boring. The match gets filed as proof. Your brain is basically a pattern recognition machine that punishes inconsistent data by making it invisible. Illusory correlation is when you link two things together because you want them to be linked or because noticing them together felt meaningful that one time. It's not quite confirmation bias, though they're cousins. This one doesn't need your belief to already exist. It just needs a memorable coincidence. Someone wore a lucky shirt during a win, so the shirt becomes responsible. A coworker who drinks coffee at meetings is always the one with good ideas, so coffee becomes code for intelligence. The human brain doesn't think in probability. It thinks in felt connection. The tricky part is that illusory correlations can feel as certain as gravity. You're not lying to yourself or being dumb. You're just noticing a pattern in a genuinely random stream, and your mind is doing exactly what evolution trained it to do. Find signals fast, even if some of them are false alarms. But false alarms add up. You avoid people who remind you of someone who hurt you. You trust industries or people based on one vivid negative experience. You make decisions that protect you from ghosts. Start catching yourself asking, how many times did this not happen? If you can't think of a clear answer, you're probably holding an illusion. The pattern might still be real, but the difference between feeling connected and actually being connected is asking for evidence instead of just relying on what your memory keeps replaying. Clustering illusion. You flip heads 4 times in a row with a coin. Your friend says, that's not random, they're wrong, and also completely right. Not about the coin, but about your brain. Heads, 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 heads feels impossible because your mind is pattern hunting equipment, and when it spots what looks like a sequence, it screams, signal. Even when you're just watching noise, do what noise does. That's clustering illusion, the deep certainty that random events form a meaningful pattern when they actually don't. Here's where it gets sticky. A stock fund outperforms the market 3 years running, so you buy it, convinced the manager found a system. A coworker texts you at exactly the moment you thought of them twice last month, so they must be psychic. You get sick after eating at restaurant X once, so you avoid it forever. Your brain collected 3 data points and built a cathedral. The trap is that clustered randomness is everywhere. If enough traders exist, some will accidentally beat the market through pure luck for years. If you think of people randomly throughout your day, sometimes a text will align with that thought. If you eat at places regularly, sometimes you'll get sick after one meal. None of it means anything, except that you lived long enough to see probability do its job, unfiltered and indifferent. What makes this dangerous is that the pattern feels real, felt real, and your brain doesn't have a good way to distinguish between, I noticed something 3 times, and I've uncovered something true. So you make decisions based on a mirage, and you defend them hard because the pattern already lives inside your head as fact. The quiet move is to ask yourself, did I decide to count this pattern, or did the pattern decide I should count it? If you'd have noticed the opposite, heads, tails, just as easily, then you're not looking at a signal. You're just watching a human mind do what it does best, create stories from static, then fall in love with them. Apophenia in noise. You're scrolling through a playlist at 2 a.m. and a song starts playing backwards by accident. Somewhere in the static, you hear your name, or a warning, or proof of something you've been suspecting. Your skin prickles. Then you realize you played it backwards, on purpose, half listening, wanting to find that thing. This is apophenia, your brain's refusal to accept randomness, its insistence on building a pattern where none exists. It's not quite a hallucination because you're not inventing the noise itself. You're assembling the pieces of genuine chaos into a shape that means something to you. We evolved this way. Our ancestors who spotted the rustle in tall grass and assumed predator survived more often than those who heard wind and shrugged. Pattern detection saved our lives. The problem is that the world is mostly noise now. Overwhelming, endless noise. and your brain has not updated its threat detection software. So, you see your ex's name in cloud shapes. You find hidden messages in song lyrics. You notice that 3 people mentioned coffee today. Then the next day, someone mentions it again. And suddenly, you're convinced the universe is trying to tell you something about coffee. Conspiracy theories live here, in this space where apophenia feels like clarity, but it also shows up in smaller, quieter ways. You assume your partner's short text means they're mad at you. You interpret a recruiter's silence as rejection. You scroll through someone's Instagram at midnight and construct an entire narrative about who they've become. The noise is always there. Your interpretation of that noise is almost entirely yours. Here's the move that matters. When you feel that prickle of pattern recognition, when you're certain you've spotted the hidden thing, pause and ask, what would have to be true if this weren't a pattern? What if it's just noise, and I'm the one adding the shape? That question won't make the patterns go away, but it might make you less confident in the ones that serve your anxiety. Regression to the mean. You crush a presentation at work and your boss raves about your performance. Next week, the one you give is fine. Just fine. Your brain immediately concludes you've lost your edge, that the first win was a fluke, that you're sliding backward. But what if nothing has changed except your expectation? What if the first presentation was just you catching a peak, and this one is simply you being you? That's regression to the mean, the invisible force that makes exceptional moments almost always followed by ordinary ones, and it shapes how you feel about yourself far more than you realize. The pattern shows up everywhere once you know to look. A basketball player has an incredible game, and suddenly everyone notices they're on a hot streak, but statistically, they're almost certainly about to perform closer to their average. A parent has an amazing day with their kid. No tantrums, genuine connection, everything clicks, and then the very next day feels impossibly hard by comparison, making them feel like a failure. A stock climbs 40% and investors panic sell, convinced it's peaked, when really it might just be returning to normal volatility. Musicians talk about the zone like it's a skill they've unlocked, then spend weeks frustrated it won't return. But the zone is mostly just variance, the random clustering of luck and focus and timing that feels permanent while you're in it. Your mind doesn't naturally account for randomness and variation. It spots the outlier and either credits you with sudden genius or blames you for sudden collapse. The trap is building your identity around those peaks and valleys instead of the steady, invisible line underneath them. If you can catch yourself mid-spiral after a disappointing follow-up to a win, you might ask, am I actually worse, or did I just happen to be exceptionally good last time? That single question rescues you from the story your emotions are writing. It doesn't kill disappointment, but it stops you from treating normal as evidence of decay. Survivorship filtering. You walk into a bookstore and see shelves full of best-selling entrepreneur memoirs. Every single one credits grit, intuition, and sleeping 4 hours a night. You absorb the lesson. That's the formula. What you don't see on the shelf is the graveyard. The 5,000 people who did exactly those things and crashed into bankruptcy or burnout. They're not writing books. Their stories vanished. This is survivorship filtering, and it's everywhere, quietly teaching you wrong lessons from incomplete data. Here's the trap. Successful people are more visible, louder, published. A billionaire tweets her morning routine. A fit influencer posts her meal prep. A startup founder talks about ignoring naysayers and trusting their gut. These voices echo everywhere. The person who ignored naysayers and lost their house savings stays quiet. The athlete who slept 4 hours and blew out their knees doesn't get airtime. The entrepreneur who made identical bets and loss slinks away. You're learning from winners only, which means you're learning from luck, privilege, timing, and circumstance packaged as universal truths. The cognitive mistake is deceptively simple, assuming you see the full picture. You don't. You see the survivors, and your brain treats them as representative of the entire path, when really they're the statistical exceptions. A portfolio manager who made wild bets and won will market himself as a genius strategist. The one who made identical bets and lost is gone from your awareness. You only absorb the first story, so you think the strategy was brilliant when it might have just been fortune. This shapes everything: how you invest money, choose a career, evaluate advice, pick a partner, assess risk. You're constantly filtering reality through the people and choices that survived long enough to tell you about it. The antidote is small but essential. Actively hunt for the invisible ones. Ask about the failures. Read the bankruptcies, not just the memoirs. Search for what's missing from the conversation. Notice which voices left the room and why. The room that stays quiet is often the most honest. Confirmation search asymmetry. You spend 20 minutes scrolling through your feed, looking for evidence that your ex is miserable without you. You find three things: a blurry photo, a vague caption, a liked comment from someone who might be a rebound. Your brain assembles them into a story, feels confirmed, and you close the app satisfied. But here's what you didn't do. You didn't spend 20 minutes looking for evidence that they're thriving. You didn't pause to count how many normal, happy photos you skipped over. You were searching for one thing, and the architecture of your attention ensured you'd find it. This is confirmation search asymmetry. The lopsided way we hunt for information. We don't search neutrally. We search like detectives, with a suspect already in mind, combing through the case file for clues that fit. And because the world is noisy and complex, there is always something that can fit if you squint hard enough. A partner seems distant? You'll find 12 moments that prove it, and gloss right past the 3 times they reached for your hand. A job feels unstable. You'll notice every joke about layoffs, every closed-door meeting, every email that arrives after hours, while your boss's praise from yesterday dissolves like it never happened. The trap isn't that you're dishonest, it's that your searching is asymmetrical. You dig hard for the hypothesis you already favor, and barely peek under the rocks for the alternative. And once you find just enough to feel confirmed, the search stops. Your mind closes the file and moves on, satisfied it figured something out. The next time you catch yourself deep in the weeds of evidence for something you already believe, try this. Spend the same amount of time actively hunting for the opposite. Not to convince yourself you're wrong, but to level the playing field. What would someone hunting for the good version of this situation find? That pause alone starts to expose how much your search was rigged from the start. Motivated numeracy. You probably think you're good at math. Not calculus, maybe, but basic numbers. Evaluating a study, comparing prices, understanding risk, and then you read a statistic that contradicts something you believe, and suddenly you're a detective, poking holes in the methodology, questioning the sample size, asking who funded the research. Meanwhile, a number that supports your view, that one slides right in. No questions asked. That's motivated numeracy. And it's not that you're bad at math, it's that your brain is excellent at math, but only when the answer doesn't threaten your identity or worldview. The skill is real. The motivation to use it selectively, that's where you get caught. A smoker who dismisses lung cancer studies, an investor who reinterprets a stock's poor earnings, a parent who reanalyzes vaccine data until it fits their narrative. They're not stupid. They're just deploying their rational mind like a weapon aimed at any number that feels dangerous. The trap is that motivated numeracy doesn't feel like bias from the inside. It feels like healthy skepticism. It feels like asking the right questions. You're not denying the math. You're just being thorough. But here's the problem nobody wants to admit. Thoroughness is only thorough if you apply it equally. The moment you fact-check hard evidence against your beliefs and skim-read evidence that supports them, you've stopped evaluating numbers and started defending territory. What makes this sticky is that numbers feel objective. Unlike opinions, they seem to carry no bias, no personal stake. But a number is only as good as the questions you're willing to ask about it. And those questions, unfortunately, live in your feelings, not your calculator. The small move is this. Next time you encounter a number that makes you angry or defensive, pause and ask yourself if you'd be this skeptical if it supported your side. Notice the heat. That heat is often the best clue that you're not thinking, you're protecting. That tiny check-in might save you from becoming another person arguing with certainty about something you haven't actually looked at closely. Belief perseverance. You read an article about your favorite public figure doing something awful. The story sticks. Then 3 days later, you find out it was fake. A hoax, a deepfake, a total misreporting. You nod, you adjust, you move on. But that first image never quite leaves. That is belief perseverance, and it is running your mind far more than you realize. Your brain does not delete old information when new facts arrive. It files it all in the same cabinet, and the first version you believed gets a kind of weight that no retraction can fully lift. The problem is not your intelligence. Intelligent people are often worse at this because they are better at finding reasons to keep the first story alive. They build arguments around it. They connect it to other things they believe. They make a home out of it. So when someone comes along with evidence that contradicts it, your smart brain does not go blank. It gets defensive. It finds gaps in the new information. It invents small doubts. It protects the old belief like it is part of your identity now, because on some level, it is. You have already told yourself a story about what this means, and changing the story means changing you. Here is where it gets sticky. The stronger your initial conviction was, the harder it digs in. Certainty is the enemy here, not confusion. Confused people update faster because they have less to defend. The people most locked in are the ones most sure they were right. So watch for moments when you are most resistant to new information. That is usually where old beliefs are deepest and most stubborn. The move is not to argue yourself out of it or bash your head against logic. It is to sit with the discomfort of holding two contradictory ideas at once, even briefly, before you decide what is real. That small tolerance for contradiction stops you from being locked into yesterday's story forever. Backfire entrenchment. You're at a table with your aunt who shares a political article you know is wrong. You fact-check it. You show her the source. You expected gratitude. Instead, she doubles down, shares it again next week, mentions it twice at dinner, defends it harder than she did before. What just happened? Your correction didn't land as a gift. It landed as a threat to her identity, and now she's holding that belief tighter to prove something to you and to herself. This is backfire entrenchment, and it lives everywhere you look once you notice it. When someone's core belief gets challenged, especially in front of others, especially if they've already told people about it, their brain doesn't calmly reassess. It digs. The belief becomes armor. Every fact you throw becomes ammunition for the other side. Proof that someone is attacking me, not that I was wrong about something small. The wrongness spreads out and attaches itself to identity. If this is false, then maybe I'm gullible, naive, not smart enough. So the wall goes higher. You see this at work when a colleague clings to a failed project strategy after you point out the missed data. You see it in yourself when someone questions a parenting choice you've already defended to friends. The backfire happens because the correction feels too close to the bone. It's not just about the idea anymore. It's about who you've already claimed to be. This isn't stupidity, it's defensive logic. If you've built your sense of competence or belonging around a particular stance, letting it crumble in real time feels like letting yourself crumble. Here's what actually shifts it. Stop positioning yourself as the one with the answer. Instead of proving her wrong, try genuine curiosity. Ask what made her believe it in the first place. Make room for her to back away without losing face. People will move their thinking if they're not busy protecting their dignity. The moment someone feels heard instead of corrected, the entrenchment starts to loosen. It's slow, it's not dramatic, but it's real. Cognitive dissonance repair. You've just spent 2 hours telling your friend how much you value honesty, how you hate people who cut corners and lie to themselves. Then, later that week, you catch yourself doing exactly that, telling a small lie to avoid an awkward conversation, justifying it as not a big deal. Your brain now has a problem. You and the truth you just spoke are not aligned. This friction, this internal conflict between what you believe about yourself and what you just did, is cognitive dissonance, and it actually hurts a little. Not physically, but somewhere underneath thought, there's tension. Your mind will move mountains to fix it, but usually not by admitting the truth. Instead, you'll twist the story. That lie you just told wasn't really lying. It was protecting someone's feelings. Or maybe you'll decide honesty isn't actually that important. People exaggerate all the time anyway. Or you'll simply forget you ever said that thing about valuing truth in the first place. These are cognitive dissonance repairs in action, and they happen faster than you can notice them. The trap is that these repairs feel true while you're doing them. Your brain doesn't repair dissonance by making you feel ashamed. It repairs it by making you feel right again, exactly like before, seamless and whole. This is why people double down on beliefs, even when evidence piles up against them. Every time new information threatens who they think they are, the brain scrambles to fix the gap, and the repairs get more elaborate, more convincing, more invisible. Watch for the moment when someone, or you, suddenly becomes very creative with explanations, when language gets flexible and context suddenly matters so much. That creativity isn't honesty, finding a loophole. It's your mind stitching the wound shut before you even feel it anymore. The real skill isn't catching the lie itself, it's noticing when the repair happened instead of when the original gap did. That's where the real awareness lives, in the space between the thing you did and the story you told yourself to make it okay. Effort, justification, loyalty. You know that person who stays in a terrible relationship way longer than makes sense, or the friend who keeps grinding at a job that pays poorly and treats them worse. Often, it's not weakness or desperation, it's actually a kind of twisted loyalty that your brain manufactures to protect itself from looking foolish. Here's how it works. The more effort you pour into something, the sleepless nights, the emotional labor, the money you've thrown at it, the harder it becomes to admit it might not be worth it. So, instead of walking away, you rewrite the story. The suffering means something now. The unfair boss becomes a learning opportunity. The cold partner becomes misunderstood. The failing project becomes a noble fight. Your brain isn't lying out of malice. It's lying because the alternative, admitting you wasted time and energy on something that didn't matter, feels unbearable. This is effort justification, and it's everywhere once you start spotting it. The sunk cost fallacy feeds it. You've already invested so much that quitting feels like erasing yourself. But here's what catches most people. The more effort you've invested, the more loyal you become, even when that loyalty hurts you. You see this in startup founders who can't pivot, in people who stay in bad friendships because they've been through so much together, in anyone defending a choice they made years ago simply because reversing it would mean admitting they were wrong then. The trap deepens because your identity gets tangled with the effort itself. Walking away doesn't just mean losing time. It means losing the story you've built about yourself as someone dedicated, resilient, committed. That's genuinely terrifying. The real question is learning to spot when your loyalty is authentic and when it's just effort talking. Ask yourself, if you were starting fresh today, would you choose this person, this job, this path again? If the answer is no, and you're still there anyway, you might be loyal to your investment, not to the actual thing. That distinction matters. Sunk cost commitment. You're sitting in a movie theater 20 minutes in, and you realize it's terrible. The plot makes no sense. The dialogue is clunky. You're bored out of your mind, but you stay. Not because the next 2 hours will suddenly get better. You already know they won't. You stay because you paid for the ticket. That $20 didn't just buy admission, it bought your obligation to sit there and suffer through it. You've already spent the money, so leaving feels like admitting waste. This is sunk cost commitment at work, and it's one of the most reliable ways to watch yourself make choices that actively work against you. Here's the trap. Your brain treats money you've already spent as if it still matters to your future decisions. It doesn't. That ticket cost is gone, whether you watch the movie or go home and read a book. But sunk costs are sticky because they feel like evidence. You invested time, money, or effort into something, so your mind whispers that abandoning it would be throwing it all away. You stay in the bad relationship longer than you should. You finish the degree you hate. You keep using the gym membership you despise because you already paid for the year. The actual choice in front of you, leave or stay, switch or continue, has nothing to do with what you've already lost. It only matters what comes next. But commitment makes us rewrite the story. We stop asking, is this worth my time now? And start asking, how much have I already given up? One is rational. One is a trap disguised as loyalty. The quiet move is to notice when you're deciding based on the past instead of the future. Next time you feel stuck because of what you've already paid, pause and ask yourself, if I hadn't already spent it, would I choose this again today? That question alone can unlock more freedom than you'd expect. Escalation of commitment. You bought a concert ticket 3 months ago for a band you sort of liked. Now the day arrives and you don't feel like going. You're tired, the weather is lousy, and honestly the album they've been promoting doesn't hit like their earlier work. But you go anyway. You tell yourself you've already paid. You've already blocked the time. Might as well get something out of it. What you're experiencing is the moment where a decision you made becomes a trap of your own making. And the trap gets tighter the more you struggle against it. Escalation of commitment isn't about liking something more because you paid for it, though that happens too. It's about the way humans unconsciously double down on bad choices to prove those choices weren't mistakes. The concert ticket is small and harmless, but the pattern shows up everywhere. The relationship you stay in because you've already invested 2 years. The business project bleeding money, but you can't kill it because you championed it in the first meeting. The degree you're finishing, even though you changed your mind about the whole field. The reason people keep throwing good money after bad is actually logical from inside your own head. Admitting the original choice was wrong feels like admitting something about you, your judgment, your taste, your competence. So instead of cutting the loss and moving forward, you find reasons to continue. You reframe it as commitment. You call it loyalty. You invest more time, more money, more emotional energy trying to make the original bad call work out. And here's what makes this sticky. The more you invest to fix it, the more committed you feel, and the harder it becomes to walk away. The escape hatch closes, not because the situation got worse, but because your ego got wrapped up in it. The next time you notice yourself justifying a sunk cost, pause and ask whether you're actually choosing forward or just protecting yesterday's decision. That small question can crack the pattern open. Consistency principle traps. You make a small donation to a charity, nothing huge, maybe 20 bucks. A month later, the same organization asks you to volunteer. You feel a little tug to say yes, even though you're busy and don't know their work well. That tug is consistency knocking. Here's the quiet logic your brain runs. You already said you care about this cause, so backing out now would mean admitting you don't, or that you lied. Your mind hates that feeling more than it hates giving up a Saturday. Consistency is powerful because it feels like integrity. It feels like being honest with yourself, but that makes it a perfect trap. Once you take a small action, sign a petition, say yes to a tiny favor, make a public comment, you've created a thread, and your brain will pull that thread in strange directions to stay true to the person you just became. A friend mentions they're thinking of getting a tattoo. You stay silent, then 6 months later, they ask if they should do it, and suddenly, you're defending the idea hard, even though you thought it was risky initially. Why? Because you didn't object loudly before, so part of you is now invested in being the friend who's cool with big decisions. You've become committed to the story you didn't even mean to write. Marketers know this cold. A company gets you to agree to something tiny, like signing up for a mailing list or clicking "I support sustainable practices." And then they escalate. The yes you gave yesterday becomes the armor around the yes you give today. The trick is not to avoid consistency. You need it to function, but you can slow down the chain. When someone asks for something bigger, ask yourself, am I saying yes because this is actually right? Or because I said yes to something small last week and I'm just trying not to contradict myself? That pause, that single question, is often enough to break the spell. Public commitment lock-in. You tell one person at a dinner table that you're finally going to quit smoking, and suddenly it becomes harder to smoke. Not because your lungs changed that night, but because smoking now contradicts the version of you that you announced to the world. That gap between who you said you'd be and who you're actually being becomes uncomfortable in a way that private intention never is. This is public commitment lock-in, and it's everywhere once you start noticing it. When you announce a goal on social media, join a visible group, or take a stance in front of people who matter, you've created a small public identity. And your brain doesn't like being inconsistent with it because consistency feels like integrity, and integrity feels like survival in the tribe. So you keep showing up to the gym, not because you suddenly love burpees, but because your brother knows you go. You stay in a relationship longer than you should because too many people have heard the story of how you met. You vote the way you've always said you would, even when your actual beliefs have shifted, because changing your mind in front of witnesses feels like weakness. The sneaky part is that this lock-in can work for you or against you, depending on what you've committed to publicly. Plant yourself in a corner about a behavior you hate, and you'll have a much harder time breaking it. But announce your transformation to the right people, and you've essentially outsourced your willpower to your reputation. Most of us never think about the audience we're choosing. When we make a commitment, we blurt it out to whoever is standing closest. Get deliberate instead. Choose your witnesses carefully. Make your commitments in front of people who want you to grow, not people who benefit from you staying the same. That small choice about who hears your commitment can reshape whether that lock-in becomes a trap or a ladder, turning the weight of reputation into something that actually pulls you forward instead of holding you down. Identity protective cognition. You've probably noticed this at dinner tables and in comment sections. Someone presents a fact, and instead of just evaluating it on its own merits, people filter it through, what does this mean about who I am? A study about politics, a statistic about race, a new health recommendation. The information doesn't arrive neutral. It lands on top of everything you've already decided you believe, and your brain immediately asks, if I accept this, what does that say about my values, my tribe, my judgment? That question is the entire game, and it's why identical facts provoke completely different reactions depending on who's hearing them. Identity protective cognition is the tendency to unconsciously reject or reinterpret information that threatens your sense of self. Not maliciously, not consciously, but automatically, the way your body tenses when you feel something cold. You'll find yourself scrutinizing sources differently depending on what they're asking you to believe. You'll generate counterarguments faster. You'll suddenly remember all the exceptions and caveats. The weaker arguments against the claim feel stronger when the claim threatens something core to who you think you are. Here's what makes this sticky. It operates below awareness. You're not lying to yourself deliberately. You're genuinely just thinking it through, the way you always do. But the stakes aren't really about the fact anymore. They're about survival of the identity you've built. So, a conservative might reject climate data not because they hate the planet, but because accepting it feels like admitting environmentalists were right all along, and that's tangled up with everything else they've chosen to stand for. A progressive might reject criticism of their side's approach to an issue because questioning it feels like betrayal. Neither person is stupid. Both are protecting something that feels like self-preservation. The next time you feel resistance to something, pause and ask, am I rejecting this because the evidence is weak, or because accepting it would change how I see myself? That small question separates you from the autopilot. Tribal signaling over accuracy. You know that moment when someone in your group says something half-true or flat-out wrong, but nobody corrects them because they're on your side? Meanwhile, if a stranger said the exact same thing, you'd fact-check them in seconds. That's tribal signaling overtaking accuracy, and it happens in offices, politics, friend groups, and family dinners constantly. Your brain isn't interested in truth in those moments. It's interested in social survival. Agreeing with your tribe on a detail, even a false one, signals loyalty. Disagreeing signals betrayal, no matter how gently you phrase it. So the person who stays quiet or joins in gets the group's approval. The person who corrects gets social friction and a small chill in the room. Over time, groups develop entire belief systems built on layers of inaccuracy, held together by belonging and repetition. You see it in neighborhoods where everyone says the same thing about the new family on the block without checking what's actually true. You see it in work teams where everyone pretends the boss's bad idea is brilliant because saying otherwise marks you as disloyal. Not a team player, not one of us. The toxin is that once accuracy gets tangled with tribalism, people stop caring which one they're actually defending anymore. They think they're defending facts when they're really defending identity and the safety of being included. And here's the quiet danger. You can't argue someone out of tribal signaling by overwhelming them with better facts. Facts make it worse because now they feel attacked and will grip their false belief even tighter to prove loyalty to the group. The move that sometimes works is showing them you respect both the tribe and the person, which gives permission to update without losing face. But mostly, just watch for when you feel that small pressure to agree with something you don't quite believe, that tiny social weight tugging at you. That pressure is tribalism testing you, and noticing it is the first step to staying honest. Bystander diffusion. You're at a crowded train platform. Someone collapses near the edge. You look around. Others are looking around too. Everyone is waiting for someone else to move. A minute passes. Another. The person is still down. Here's what makes this so strange. If that same person had collapsed right in front of you alone, you'd have already knelt down, already called for help, already been doing something. But in a crowd, the exact same emergency feels like someone else's responsibility. This is bystander diffusion, and it's not about being cold or indifferent as individuals. It's about how groups create a fog around responsibility. When lots of eyes are watching, each person's sense of urgency gets divided by the number of people present. It's almost mathematical. You unconsciously think, someone here must be better qualified. Or, if this were really serious, wouldn't someone have acted by now? Or simply, it's not my job. The weird part is how fast this happens and how invisible it is. You're not choosing to be selfish. Your brain is actually doing a kind of social accounting, distributing the weight of action across everyone present, which means it lands on no one. We see this in offices when something unethical happens and nobody reports it because surely someone else will. We see it in group chats where a person reaches out and gets read but never answered because everyone assumes another friend already replied. We even see it in family systems where a difficult conversation never happens because everyone's waiting for someone else to bring it up first. The fix isn't guilt or shame, it's awareness. When you notice yourself waiting for someone else to act, pause and ask, what if I'm the only one who's going to move? What if my hesitation is also someone else's? The moment you feel that fog trying to settle, you're already becoming the exception. Sometimes being the one who breaks the pattern is all it takes to snap everyone else out of the haze. Pluralistic ignorance. You're at a party where nobody is laughing. The comedian on the TV is fine. The drinks are fine. Everyone seems polite and engaged, but the air feels stiff, like everyone agreed to be mildly bored, and nobody wants to admit they're not actually enjoying themselves. So you laugh a little harder at the next joke, and suddenly someone else laughs, and then another person relaxes, and by the end of the night, the room has shifted into something warmer. What changed? Nothing. What was always true? That most people there were waiting for someone else to give permission to have fun. That's pluralistic ignorance. When a whole group believes one thing while privately believing something different, and nobody speaks up because everyone assumes everyone else is fine with the collective lie. It spreads fastest in crowds because of a beautiful irony. The more people around you, the more invisible you feel. If you're the only one raising your hand with a question in the meeting, you risk looking stupid. But if you stay silent, you're validating the silent agreement that what's happening is normal, important, agreed upon. Even though statistically, half the room is confused or frustrated, this shapes what feels acceptable to say at work, what gets laughed at in groups, what political beliefs people hold close to their chest while nodding along publicly. The trap deepens because pluralistic ignorance can lock in place for years if nobody speaks, even though it collapses instantly the moment one person breaks it. One honest question, one confession that something doesn't make sense, one person leaving the party early, and suddenly other people realize they weren't alone. Pay attention to those moments when you're performing agreement while feeling something different inside. That gap between your inner experience and your outer presentation is the breeding ground for this pattern. The smallest crack in the wall of collective pretense, a single raised eyebrow, a quiet, "I'm not sure about this," is often all it takes to remind people they were never actually alone in what they felt. Preference falsification. You're at a dinner table where someone shares a political opinion and you feel it differently, maybe completely opposite. But instead of saying so, you nod. Maybe you even say, "Yeah, I see that," when you don't. No drama, no argument, just silence masquerading as agreement. That gap between what you actually think and what you let show is preference falsification, and it's everywhere once you start watching for it. The strange part isn't that you did it once, it's that after you do it a few times, something shifts. Your stated preference starts to feel real. You begin to believe what you claim to believe. Your mind doesn't like contradictions, so it smooths things over, and the performance becomes the truth. When enough people are doing this, all of you performing agreement while privately disagreeing, the room develops a false consensus. Everyone walks out thinking everyone else agrees, when really, nobody does. You've all been watching each other's performance and mistaking it for honesty. This happens in workplaces constantly. A boss floats an idea, and because nobody wants conflict, everyone seems on board. Months later, the whole initiative collapses because nobody actually believed in it. The agreement was always an illusion everyone was maintaining for each other. The really dangerous version happens at scale. Public opinion looks stable, even unanimous, right up until the moment it shifts. Then suddenly people you thought were true believers are admitting they never were. It's not that they changed their minds overnight. They were falsifying the whole time, waiting for someone else to break the pattern first. Nobody wants to be the first to admit doubt, so the false consensus hardens into something that feels inevitable. Everyone feels trapped by everyone else's conviction, except nobody's actually convicted. If you catch yourself performing agreement when you feel something different, that awareness matters. It gives you a choice. Stay silent, or be the first one to crack the illusion and watch what happens. The Abilene Paradox. You're sitting at a dinner table with 3 people you trust. Someone suggests driving to Abilene, a dusty town 50 miles away on a hot afternoon. Nobody really wants to go. You know it'll be an uncomfortable, loud car ride with mediocre food at the end. But you don't say that. Instead, you say, "Sure, sounds good." The other 2 nod along. An hour later, you're all sweating in a car, resenting every minute, wondering why you agreed to something nobody wanted. When you finally get back, someone laughs and says, "That was awful, right?" Everyone agrees. Then someone asks, "Well, why did we go?" Silence. Nobody knows. This is the Abilene paradox, a pattern running so many of your decisions that you've probably stopped noticing it entirely. It happens when a group collectively decides to do something that nobody in the group actually wants, because everyone assumes the others want it. The mechanism is pure fear. You don't want to be the one who kills the vibe, so you stay quiet and watch everyone else nod along. Meanwhile, they're doing the exact same calculation. The group moves towards something it opposes. It's not peer pressure in the aggressive sense. It's the opposite of that. It's the pressure of silence, masquerading as consensus. What makes it stick is how invisible it is afterward. Nobody can quite explain what happened. You can't blame anyone. Everyone technically agreed, but everyone also felt that unspoken dread before it started. In your own life, this shows up smaller. Meetings where nobody believes in the decision, but everyone acts like they do. Road trips booked by committee enthusiasm rather than actual interest. Restaurant choices where 3 people all wanted something different, but ordered what seemed safest. The hard part is being the first to break silence, knowing that honesty feels riskier than going along. But when someone does say it, "I'm actually not excited about this," watch what happens. The others relax into the truth almost instantly. 10 seconds of real words can crack the whole thing open. Groupthink drift. You sit in a meeting and the leader floats an idea that doesn't quite land right with you. Someone else nods. Then another person builds on it. Now 3 voices are saying variations of the same thing, and suddenly you're wondering if maybe you missed something. You stay quiet. By the end of the hour, that half-baked idea has become group consensus, and everyone leaves as if it was inevitable. That's groupthink drift, and it's not drama or malice. It's just momentum finding people who are hungry for agreement. The trap is that it doesn't feel like you're being pressured. It feels like clarity. When others nod, your brain reads that as permission to relax. You weren't arguing before. You were just thinking, but thinking alone starts to feel weird, almost antisocial, once the group has already moved forward. The psychology is wired into us. Humans are herd creatures who evolved to match the tribe's pace, and disagreeing costs real social energy. So your small doubt, the one that made sense 5 minutes ago, just evaporates into the background noise. And because no single moment was a forced surrender, you can't even pinpoint where you switched sides. It happened so smoothly that your own mind didn't announce it. This happens in boardrooms and family dinners and friend groups and Slack channels, anywhere people gather around a decision. The drift is gradual enough that nobody's lying. Everyone genuinely believes they came to this together, but they didn't. They just stopped thinking alone once the current started moving. The best antidote isn't bravery or some heroic stand, it's structure. Create actual friction in the group process. Ask specifically for objections before the vote. Write down your initial thoughts before the meeting and compare them after. Assign someone the role of skeptic, even if they don't feel it. Small procedural friction is actually friction against your own capitulation. The goal isn't to be the tiresome contrarian, it's to stay honest with what you actually think, even when the room has already decided and is waiting for your nod. Risky shift polarization. You've probably noticed it before without knowing what to call it. A group of friends talking about taking a trip, and suddenly the conversation spirals into planning something wildly ambitious. Skydiving, a cross-country road trip with no budget, a spontaneous move to another city. Alone, each person would have hemmed and hawed, pulled out their spreadsheet, mentioned practical concerns. Together, they feed each other's excitement until the reasonable version of the plan disappears entirely. That's risky shift at work, and it happens because of how we think when we're surrounded by people who agree with us. When a group leans toward a particular opinion or action, even a moderately risky one, the social pressure doesn't push toward compromise. It amplifies. Each person wants to be slightly more committed than the last, wants to show they're not the cautious one, holding everyone back. The jokes get bolder, the skepticism gets quieter, and what started as a reasonable idea suddenly feels like the minimum acceptable take. The group doesn't move to the middle ground, it moves to the extreme. This isn't just about vacations. Watch it happen in political conversations, investment decisions, workplace initiatives, even parenting choices discussed in mommy or daddy groups. The shift happens because no one wants to be the killjoy, the person who asks, "Wait, but what about risk?" once momentum starts rolling. And here's what makes it sticky. You probably can't feel it happening when you're inside the group. You feel like you're thinking more clearly, not less. The people around you feel like they're validating your instincts, not hijacking them. Your own hesitation doesn't register as wisdom in that moment. It feels like timidity, like missing out on something everyone else understands. So the next time you're in a group heading toward a collective decision, notice that moment when the cautious voice in you gets quiet. That silence might be worth listening to, because it's often the last warning before the group's certainty becomes your own. Ringelmann's social loafing. You're in a group project at work, and there's a report due Friday. You know the deadline is firm, you know it matters, but something shifts the moment you realize there are 4 other people on the team. You don't slack off consciously. Nobody does. You just pull back a little. Tell yourself someone else will catch the details. Maybe send one less email than you would if it was just you. That invisible pull toward less effort in a crowd is so old it has a name. Ringelmann effect, named after a French agricultural engineer who tested it in the 1880s with something as simple as rope pulling. He had people pull a rope alone, then in groups, and measured the force. The pattern was brutal and clear. Add more people, and the average force per person dropped, not because anyone got weaker, but because individual accountability dissolves in a crowd. You become one of many, which means you become slightly less yourself. The science since then has confirmed it works across almost everything: brainstorming, cleanup duties, fundraising, even online comment sections where 1,000 people see a question but nobody answers. The trap is that you don't feel the loafing happening. You feel normal. You feel like you're still trying, still present. That's exactly why it sticks around. Your brain doesn't flag it as laziness, it flags it as reasonable distribution of effort. And because everyone else in the group is doing the same unconscious pullback, the whole system underperforms without anyone realizing by how much. What's worth knowing is that this isn't about character or effort in isolation. It's about attention and visibility. The moment someone knows their work is being tracked or that they're the actual person responsible for one piece, that invisibility breaks. The rope gets pulled harder. Attention returns. You become yourself again instead of becoming the group. That's not a fix for group work. That's just how you make group work actually happen. Free rider detection. Watch what happens the moment someone stops contributing but keeps collecting the benefits. A group chat for a work project starts with everyone engaged. Then one person goes silent. They still read every update. They still show up for the payoff. The work, gone. What's wild is how fast you notice it and how much it bothers you. Not because you're a saint, but because your brain is wired to catch cheaters in a cooperative game. Your ancestors survived by spotting the person taking honey from the hive without building the wax, and that same system is running constantly in the background of every group you've ever belonged to. You're astonishingly good at tracking who contributes and who doesn't. Often without realizing, you're keeping score. You remember the friend who never picks up the tab. You notice the colleague who talks in meetings but never does the prep work. You catch the family member who shows up for holidays but never calls. The system is so finely tuned that unfairness creates a visceral sense of injustice, not abstract moral anger, but real resentment that can linger for years. Here's where it gets interesting. This detection ability is so sensitive, it sometimes fires when it shouldn't. You might label someone a free rider because you didn't see their contribution. Maybe they worked quietly behind the scenes. Maybe they contributed in a way that's invisible to you. A kindness you didn't witness. A burden they lifted that you didn't notice. Maybe they're dealing with something that made showing up all they could manage that week. The trap is treating detection like judgment, as if spotting a pattern means you've solved the whole puzzle. Before you mentally write someone off as a leech, ask what effort you might be missing. Not because you owe them unlimited grace, but because your detection system is built for catching real patterns, and false alarms waste the tool by dulling your ability to spot genuine unfairness when it actually shows up. Third-party punishment urge. You're scrolling through your phone and see a video of someone cutting in line, or you read about a celebrity who said something thoughtless, and something inside you wakes up. Not mild annoyance, a surge. You want that person held accountable, preferably publicly, preferably now. The fascinating part is that you have no skin in the game. The line cutter didn't hurt you. The celebrity's words didn't land on your shoulders, yet your body is already drafting a response, and your finger hovers over the reply button. This is third-party punishment urge, and it runs deeper than justice. It's about signaling. When you punish someone for breaking a social rule, especially when watching others watch you do it, You're broadcasting that you're the kind of person who enforces norms. You're trustworthy. You have standards. You're not soft. In evolutionary terms, this made you safer to cooperate with, more likely to be picked for the tribe's important work. But here's what makes it tricky. You'll often feel this urge most intensely, not when the violation is worst, but when the violation is visible and the punishment will be witnessed. A friend stealing your lunch stings, but calling them out in a quiet text feels less satisfying than resharing their mistake in a group chat where everyone can see you draw the line. A stranger's rudeness in a private moment barely registers, but that same rudeness on a public platform, your fingers twitch. The punishment isn't actually about fixing the problem or even about the person who broke the rule. It's about you, positioned as the moral guardian in front of an audience. Here's the thing worth sitting with. The intensity of your outrage often tracks with the size of the audience, not the size of the harm. Watch yourself next time you feel that surge to correct, shame, or report someone. Ask yourself honestly, am I doing this because it actually matters or because I want to be seen doing it? The answer, and you'll feel it in your chest, will tell you everything about what's really driving your hand and whether the punishment is really about them at all. Fairness over profit spite. You're at a restaurant and notice the server made a small mistake on your bill. They undercharged you by $5. Your first instinct isn't to pocket the difference quietly, it's to flag it and let them know. Why would you do that? You gain nothing. They might not even notice. But something in you registers that it wouldn't be fair, and fairness matters more than a small win. Even when no one's watching, that impulse runs deeper than logic, and it reveals something wild about how your brain is wired. Psychologists call this the spite premium, and it's the moment you'll sacrifice real money, your actual money, just to punish unfairness or enforce a principle. In lab studies, people routinely reject deals that benefit them financially if those deals feel unfair to others. They'll burn resources to teach someone a lesson about justice. A person in poverty will turn down a gift if accepting it means appearing weak or beholden. A customer will leave a bad review and warn their friends away from a business, not because they need to, but because unfairness demands a response. You're not thinking about profit, you're thinking about rightness. What makes this pattern so human is that it works both ways. The fairness impulse can make you kinder than logic alone would predict. Generous, principled, loyal to people who treat you right. But it can also make you destructive toward anyone who seems to cut corners. You'll sabotage your own interests to punish cheating. You'll invest enormous energy in a grudge that costs you sleep and peace, because some part of you will not tolerate being made a fool of. The line between noble and self-destructive is thin, and fairness is often where we cross it without noticing. The question isn't whether you care about fairness. You do, viscerally. The question is, how much are you willing to lose to protect it? Before your next righteous stand, sit with that one for a moment. Minimal group formation. There's a moment in most group settings where something weird happens without anyone deciding it should. You suddenly belong and somebody else doesn't, and the dividing line was basically arbitrary. Maybe you were sorted by shirt color for a game, or your table got assigned randomly at a work lunch, and within minutes, a mild us versus them feeling starts humming beneath the surface. That's minimal group formation, and it requires almost nothing to trigger. The psychologist Henri Tajfel proved this by splitting people into groups based on a coin flip, giving them no history together, no shared goal, nothing real to bind them. And they still immediately favored their own group when distributing resources. Just knowing you were in the same arbitrary category was enough. Your brain didn't need a good reason. It just needed a line drawn somewhere. What gets sticky is watching it happen inside yourself. If you stay still long enough, the person wearing your team's color gets the benefit of the doubt on something unclear. A stranger from your city feels slightly more trustworthy than someone from 3 states over. A colleague who went to your college lands differently in the room than one who didn't. None of these should matter for actual competence or character, but your tribal wiring doesn't ask permission before firing up. Once the group lines form, even thin ones, they reinforce themselves through the choices you make without noticing. You pay more attention to your group's wins and the other group's failures. You interpret the same ambiguous action as proof of your virtue or their flaw, and you feel like you're being objective the whole time. The move isn't to pretend group categories don't exist. It's to notice when the dividing line feels frictionless, because that's usually when it's thinnest and most invisible, doing the most work on your sense of who deserves your trust. Out-group uniformity illusion. You walk into a room where your friend points at a group of people from a different city, country, or social circle and says something like, "They're all the same, aren't they?" and something in you nods along, even though you know that's not quite true. That nodding is what researchers call the outgroup uniformity illusion, the stubborn belief that people who aren't in your tribe are basically copies of each other, while the people in your own group are vivid and complicated and unique. The irony is brutal and automatic. When you think of your own social circle, you see Derek, who loves true crime but is terrible with money, and Sarah, who codes at night but only eats breakfast foods, and Tom, who collects vintage maps and has weird opinions about coffee. But when you think of that outgroup, corporate types, or gamers, or people from that other neighborhood, they flatten into a single cardboard cutout. Boring, predictable, interchangeable. Your brain is doing efficient work, not lazy work. It has less exposure to the outgroup, so it relies on the few examples it has absorbed and whatever stereotypes have stuck around. You're not being cruel, you're being practical, with limited information. But that practicality hardens into certainty fast, and suddenly the category feels real, in a way the individual people never do. Familiarity is the actual antidote. Not just knowing about people, but knowing them. When you spend real time with someone from an outgroup, hearing their contradictions, their embarrassing humor, their specific griefs and weird joys, the illusion cracks. They stop being a category and start being a person with a name and a story that doesn't fit the box you built for them. The next time you catch yourself thinking a whole group is uniform, pause and ask, have I actually spent time with enough of these people to know, or am I pattern matching from limited data and echoes? That tiny question is often enough to soften the cardboard and remind you that boredom is usually just distance. In group homogeneity blindness, walk into any office lunchroom and you'll notice it immediately if you're watching for it. The marketing team sits together, the engineers cluster in their corner, finance hugs their table. Ask any of them to describe the other groups, and here's what happens. The marketing people will say, engineers are all the same, logical to the point of robotic, probably wear the same 3 colors. The engineers will dismiss marketing as shallow and performative. Finance sees both groups as flaky and impulsive. None of them notice that their own group contains a quiet anarchist, a former musician, someone who cries at the draft budget, and a person who has never once worn the expected dress code. We see our own people as individuals. We see their people as a type. Your tribe feels interesting because you know the actual people in it, the contradictions, the secret dreams, the time someone surprised you. Their tribe looks flat because you've never had coffee with them, never heard them talk about what actually matters. This matters because it feeds every conflict that matters. Politics, culture wars, generational beef, even neighborhood disputes. You assume the other side is monolithic, motivated by one simple thing: easy to predict. Meanwhile, your side contains multitudes, conflicted motives, hidden depths, legitimate disagreements nobody talks about. The trap is that this blindness feels like clarity. When you see someone from the outgroup, you're pattern matching to a simplified version you've built, not actually meeting the person, and they're doing the exact same thing to you. The moment you start asking about the exceptions in the other group, about the person who doesn't fit the story everyone tells, the whole flat picture starts developing depth. Next time you're in a group conversation where everyone's mocking another group, pay attention to how thin that description sounds compared to how you'd actually describe your own people. Then catch yourself doing it the very next day. Common enemy bonding. You have probably felt it at least once. That strange surge of closeness with someone you actually dislike the moment you discover you both hate the same person or thing. A coworker you normally avoid suddenly becomes your ally in the break room when a mutual annoyance walks past. 2 friends stop bickering instantly when a third friend does something that offends them both. It is almost like betrayal and friction get erased by shared outrage, and suddenly you are standing shoulder to shoulder with someone you would normally keep at arm's length. This is common enemy bonding, and it is so reliable that you can almost predict when it will happen. The mechanism is simple. Shared opposition creates a we against them feeling that overrides other tensions. Your brain treats the external threat as more urgent than the internal friction. Cooperation becomes easier when there is something larger looming, something that both of you want to resist or defeat. The danger is that this bond is fragile and often gets mistaken for genuine connection. Once the common enemy disappears, the original friction returns, like it never left. You have seen this play out everywhere. Friendships that dissolve the moment the thing they bonded over is resolved. Political alliances that crumble after an election. Workplace teams that fracture when the crisis passes. People can spend months or years orbiting each other through shared opposition, believing they have built real trust, only to discover, when the pressure lifts, that they have almost nothing else holding them together. The stickier realization is how often institutions and groups rely on this without admitting it. Keep the enemy visible, keep the threat active, and the group stays together. The moment you remove the common enemy, cohesion becomes your problem. Notice when your closeness with someone depends almost entirely on what you are against rather than what you are for. That gap often tells you everything you need to know about whether the bond will survive tomorrow. Scapegoat consolidation. You've watched a team fall apart, maybe at work, maybe in a friend group. At first, there's a real problem. A missed deadline, a broken promise, something that actually went wrong. But then something strange happens. Instead of everyone sitting with the messy truth, the group latches onto one person. That one person becomes the reason, not a contributing factor, the reason. And suddenly, everyone else is united against them, bonded by shared blame. The group feels coherent in a way it didn't before, and that feeling of unity is intoxicating, even though nothing structural has changed. Here's why it works so dangerously well. It's efficient. Diffuse complicated failure is terrifying because it means anyone could be next, but a single villain, that's manageable. You can point at them, you can restrict their role, or exclude them entirely. The group feels like it has agency, like it has fixed something, when really it's just replaced one kind of pain with another. The trapped person absorbs the group's fear and shame, so the group can feel clean. Watch what happens next. And this is critical. Once the scapegoat is established, the group gets strangely protective of that narrative. New evidence that contradicts it gets filtered out or reinterpreted. Someone tries to point out shared responsibility and gets met with defensiveness or social pressure to stay aligned. The scapegoat becomes essential to the group's identity. Removing them would mean admitting the real problem has roots everywhere, in the systems, the culture, the decisions everyone helped make. That's too destabilizing. The cost lands entirely on one person, while the machinery that created the failure stays running untouched. So the next time a group suddenly finds perfect agreement on who ruined everything, sit with that discomfort. Ask whose interests are served by this kind of clarity. Notice how quickly dissent becomes disloyalty. That's not justice finding its target. That's fear reorganizing itself into something that feels like safety and someone paying the price for the group's relief. Social proof cascades. You walk into a restaurant and notice everyone is sitting in the front section, leaving the back half empty. So you sit in the front too, not because the food is better there, but because everyone else is there. That person at the next table ordered what you were considering, so now you want it. A tweet gets 50 likes, then 500, then you feel the urge to like it too, even though you didn't care before those numbers appeared. This is how humans actually decide. We don't weigh options in a vacuum. We watch what others are doing, and our brains treat popularity as a kind of proof. One person does something, then another follows, then another, and suddenly what seemed neutral or risky becomes obvious and safe. The cascade builds momentum that has nothing to do with the thing itself. What makes this pattern nearly invisible is how genuine your choice feels from the inside. You are choosing freely while you are reading the room and mirroring it. And here is where it gets sticky. Cascades reverse just as fast as they build. A restaurant goes from packed to empty in weeks. A trending topic dies the moment it stops being trendy. A social movement gains force, not because more people believe in it each day, but because each new visibility makes it feel bigger, which recruits more people, which makes it even more visible. The thing that felt inevitable suddenly feels obvious. It was always going to happen, even though it depended entirely on someone being first, someone else being second, and enough people paying attention to the sequence. You cannot always tell if you are in a cascade because you are inside it. The belief feels genuine. The preference feels real, but if you rewind to before the cascade started, you might not have chosen the same way at all. Start noticing when you are deciding based on what others already decided versus what you actually want. That gap is where you learn to see your own automation. Costly signaling displays. A guy buys a car he can barely afford. Not because he needs to get anywhere. He already has reliable transport. He needs the neighborhood to know he made it. That shiny hood, the rattle of the engine when he pulls out at dawn, the way it catches in the driveway light. None of that moves him faster or safer. It moves his status. That is costly signaling, and you are watching it happen everywhere once you start looking. The peacock's tail is the textbook example. Absurdly colorful, metabolically expensive, pure liability in a fight. Yet peahens choose males with the biggest ones. Why? Because the tail screams, I am so healthy and strong, I can afford to drag this handicap around and still survive. It is a proof of quality that cannot fake itself. You cannot lie about a tale you have to maintain. Humans play the same game, just with fancier props. Luxury brands work because they are worse, they cost more, wear out faster, require more maintenance. That inefficiency is the point. When you wear a status symbol, you are saying, I have resources so abundant, I can waste them on ornament. The lawyer with the Rolex, the influencer with the designer handbag, the startup founder in the limited edition sneakers. Each is broadcasting something their bank account has to back up. But here is where it gets tangled. You start believing the signal is the thing itself. You think the watch makes you punctual, the car makes you successful. The signal only works if resources flow backward, if the display actually costs something real. Once everyone sees through it, the cost has to climb. Prices rise, versions multiply, labels get more obscure. You are in an arms race with no finish line, competing with strangers playing identical games. Pay attention to what you signal without meaning to. Your phone, your coffee choice, the books on your shelf. You are advertising something every single day. The real question is whether you chose the message you are sending. Conspicuous humility. You know that person who makes a point of mentioning how little they care about status, usually while demonstrating incredible status? The executive who loudly brags about flying economy class, the wealthy friend who keeps bringing up their tiny apartment, while sipping wine that costs more than rent. That's conspicuous humility, and it's humility's weirder, more exhausting cousin. It's a performance that looks like modesty, but operates like a flex, because the whole arrangement requires an audience to witness how unimpressed you are by impressive things. The trick works because we live in a world tired of overt bragging. Direct boasting feels crude, so humble bragging evolved as the socially acceptable workaround. But here's where it gets sticky. Conspicuous humility often lands harder than straight arrogance because it hijacks your brain's trust system. When someone claims not to care about something valuable, our instinct is to believe them. If they tear, it feels like evidence of character, so when the Harvard graduate says the degree didn't really matter or the best-selling author downplays their sales numbers, you absorb both the claim of humility and the underlying fact simultaneously. You get the status marker and the performance of rejecting status markers all at once. The person walks away looking both accomplished and principled. What makes this pattern stick is that it's often unconscious. Most people aren't cynically calculating, they're just navigating a social world where straightforward self-promotion reads as obnoxious, so the humility wrapper becomes automatic. The real cost isn't deception exactly. It's that it muddies conversation. You can't actually talk about achievement without it feeling like a performance, so honest people stay quiet, and the humble brags fill the space. The exhaustion comes not from the brag itself, but from the energy required to pretend you didn't notice it. Next time you hear someone minimize something impressive, notice whether they seem comfortable sitting with it unsaid, or whether they need to keep circling back to tell you how little it matters. That small difference usually tells you everything. Humble brag mechanics. You see it all the time on social media. Someone posts, "Ugh, so exhausted from my beach vacation," or "Can't believe I have to fly business class again. My back is killing me." It lands weird, right? Because they are not actually complaining about the good thing. They are complaining about the side effect of the good thing, which lets them talk about the good thing while pretending they are not. That is the humble brag engine, running exactly as designed. What makes it sting is the gap between what they say and what they mean. Everyone sees the real message underneath, which creates this low-voltage social discomfort. You know they are bragging, so the whole thing feels slippery, almost insulting to your intelligence. The architecture is simple. Lead with a complaint, embed a brag, let the audience do the work of seeing through it. It protects the speaker, because if anyone calls them out, they can retreat to, "I was just venting." Plausible deniability built right in. But here is what really matters. Humble brags reveal something honest about the speaker's inner world. They show you someone who wants credit for something good, wants sympathy for something bad, and wants both simultaneously. They want to have the cake and be seen eating it while claiming the cake is making them exhausted. Pay close attention to where people humble brag hardest: expensive problems, attractive problems, successful problems, because that tells you what they are actually insecure about. It is never the vacation itself or the flight. It is the fear that no one will think they have earned it, or that without advertising it, the good thing might not count as real. The brag becomes proof of legitimacy, a way to anchor value to something they already have. Start noticing it in yourself and others, and you will see humble brags everywhere, which means you will also start asking a quieter question about your own announcements. What am I actually bragging about right now, and what am I afraid will go unseen if I do not say it out loud? Virtue signaling arms race. You notice it on social media first. Someone posts a donation screenshot with a caption about systemic injustice, and 3 hours later, a friend has posted a bigger donation with a longer, more articulate post. Then another person joins in with theirs. What started as an individual act of good faith has become a stage. The dynamic shift is subtle but real. People stop competing to do good and start competing to be seen doing good, and those are not the same thing at all. Visibility has become currency, and when your moral status gets measured by how publicly you perform it, the incentive structure warps. You are not just trying to help. You are trying to make sure everyone knows you are the kind of person who helps. Soon, the whole group is locked in a spiral where merely doing the right thing feels insufficient. You have to announce it, frame it, make it aesthetically compelling. The donations grow, the posts grow, the performance grows, but something in the original impulse corrodes. Here is the trap. The person who feels most virtuous is often the one performing most loudly, not the one actually making the deepest impact. A teacher who tutors kids after hours in silence is invisible. An influencer who posts about education reform gets amplified. Neither is necessarily fraudulent, but the system rewards visibility over substance, and everyone feels the pressure. What wrecks relationships and community trust is when this exhausts everyone. People start assuming motive instead of taking actions at face value. Is she doing this because she cares or because she wants the image? The cynicism sets in. If you want to stay rooted in your own values without getting pulled into the performance treadmill, try this. Notice when you get the urge to document something good you are doing, not to shame yourself, but to ask if the urge to share is coming from genuine connection or from status anxiety. That pause alone can reset the dial. Moral licensing rebound. You donate $50 to a charity on a Monday morning, and suddenly, the rest of the week feels like it belongs to you. You skip the gym. You order takeout instead of cooking. You cut someone off in traffic and don't feel quite as bad. That lightness you feel, that permission slip your brain just issued, has a name, and it's quietly steering your actual behavior in ways you probably don't notice until it's too late. The mechanism is elegant and almost cruel. When you do something that reinforces your self-image as a good person, your brain rewards you with a temporary moral discount on future choices. You've banked goodness, so to speak, and now you can spend it. The trap is that the spending rarely equals the deposit. One act of genuine kindness doesn't actually balance out a week of small unkindnesses, yet your sense of yourself stays intact either way. You feel like you're on the right side of the equation when mathematically you're not even close. What makes this so sticky is that it operates beneath conscious math. Nobody sits down and thinks, I was generous once, so now I have earned the right to be selfish. Instead, it feels like balance. It feels like fairness. Your internal accountant has already moved the numbers around. The rebound part, the part where you swing back towards selfishness or laziness, doesn't announce itself as a backslide. It feels normal because you've freshly done something good. Whatever comes next gets filtered through that lens. You're still the person who donated. That single action becomes the story you tell yourself, even as your actual pattern drifts somewhere else entirely. The antidote isn't to stop doing good things. It's to stop treating single actions as moral armor. Think of kindness not as a transaction, but as a direction. Something you're building over weeks and months, not something that pays interest after one deposit. That shift alone changes what you actually do. Self-serving attribution split. You nail a presentation at work and immediately think about how well prepared you were, how sharp your thinking is today. Your coworker nails the same presentation and you assume they got lucky with the room or the client was already leaning their way. Flip the scenario. You bomb a meeting and blame the terrible lighting, the fact that you didn't sleep well, the way the client was hostile from the start. Your coworker bombs and you think they just weren't sharp enough, didn't prepare properly. Welcome to the self-serving bias. The strange accounting system your brain uses where you take credit for wins and outsource blame for losses. But you flip the script entirely. When judging other people, they win because of circumstances. You win because of merit. You lose because of circumstances. They lose because they're not good enough. It's not dishonesty exactly. Your brain genuinely processes these stories differently. Success feels like it came from inside you. Your effort, your smarts, your preparation. Failure feels like it came from outside. Bad luck, bad timing, bad conditions. But here's the brutal part. You apply the exact opposite logic to everyone else. Their success looks circumstantial to you. Their failure looks like a character flaw. This is why workplaces feel like Cold Wars. Two people experience the same outcome and walk away with completely opposite stories about what it means. You're both using the self-serving split, but in opposite directions, and you never realize it. The friction isn't about the facts. It's that you're measuring yourself and others with different scales entirely. Start noticing when you credit luck or externals for your own misses. Then notice when you do the exact opposite for someone else's miss. That tiny awareness, just catching yourself mid-explanation, doesn't fix the bias, but it softens the judgment enough to stay curious instead of certain. Fundamental attribution error. Someone cuts you off in traffic and your brain whispers, they're reckless, they don't care, they're a bad driver. But what you don't know is their kid is in the back seat screaming with appendicitis and they're racing to the hospital. You saw the swerve and invented the character to match it, and that's the trap we all fall into. When a stranger does something unkind, we blame their nature. When we do the same thing, we blame the situation. Your friend is late because they're flaky. You're late because traffic was impossible. A coworker snaps at you because they're hostile. You snap back because you're stressed. The same behavior gets two completely different explanations, depending on whose behavior it is. This gap isn't a small quirk. It's a built-in distortion that shapes how you judge almost everyone you meet. A person who seems incompetent might be having the worst day of their life. Someone who looks selfish might be scared. The barista who seems cold might be running on 3 hours of sleep after their mom's diagnosis. But here's what makes this pattern so sticky. We rarely have access to the full situation. We only see the surface action, so we fill in the character story ourselves, and it usually lands harsh. The cost is real. It hardens your view of people. It makes you slower to forgive. It justifies unkindness in return. Every time you meet a stranger, you're building a story about who they are from a single moment, usually their worst one. Next time you're about to write someone off as that type of person, try something different. Pause and ask yourself what you'd need to know about their day, their history, their fear, to explain the same action more gently. You might be surprised how often the answer matters more than you thought it would, and how much it changes the way you move through a room full of people you don't understand yet. Actor-observer asymmetry. Your friend cancels dinner last minute, and you think, they're flaky, they don't prioritize me, they've never been reliable. Meanwhile, when you cancel, it's obvious. You had a migraine. The day spiraled. Circumstances were beyond your control. Same action, two completely different stories depending on which side of it you're standing on. And that gap is actor-observer asymmetry. Here's the mechanism. When you do something, you're drowning in context. You see the traffic jam that made you late, the email that derailed your morning, the genuine reason you didn't call back. You're inside your own story. But when someone else does the same thing, you see only the action itself. No context, no invisible forces pressing down on them. Your brain has unlimited access to your own interior life and zero access to everyone else's, so it fills that gap with character judgments, flakiness, selfishness, carelessness. You mistake their situation for their personality. A colleague shows up grumpy, and you think they're difficult. They show up grumpy, and they hear only the chaos of their own day. A partner forgets something important, and you interpret indifference. They forget, and they're only aware of the weight of everything they're carrying. The weird part is that you're simultaneously the actor and the observer in different relationships. You get grace for your own mess, but dole out character verdicts for others' identical mess, and everyone around you is doing exactly the same thing to you, assuming your personality when they can't see your context. What saves the relationships that last is a simple habit. People who develop the reflex to ask what they don't know. When someone's behavior stings, pause and ask what context you're missing, not to excuse them, but to stop confusing situation with character. That single question resets everything, because suddenly you're looking at the same story from the same angle, and the person stops being a type and starts being human again. Ultimate attribution bias. You cut someone off in traffic and immediately think, what a reckless driver. But when you cut someone off, you think, I didn't see them. The sun was in my eyes. That split-second difference in how you explain the same action is the entire architecture of ultimate attribution bias. When other people mess up, we pin it on who they are. When we mess up, we pin it on what happened to us. And here's where it gets sticky. This isn't just politeness or self-protection. It's a bias so deep we barely notice we're doing it, yet it shapes nearly every conflict, misunderstanding, and grudge you carry. Watch it happen in the wild. A coworker misses a deadline, and you think they're disorganized or lazy. They tell you their kid got sick, their laptop crashed, and they were helping a family member move. Suddenly, their character seems fine. Circumstances were just brutal. But flip it. You miss a deadline. Do you wait for people to ask before mentioning the chaos? Or do you lead with it, as if they should obviously know your life is complicated right now? The bias tilts toward blaming identity when it's someone else's failure, and circumstance when it's ours. This matters because it creates a silent rift. The other person feels judged for who they are when they know the truth is messier. You feel misunderstood because nobody asked about your constraints. Over time, these misattributions stack. You start believing certain people are flaky or unreliable, when really you just don't know their full story. They start feeling judged, so they stop explaining. The gap widens. The antidote is small but deliberate. When someone disappoints you, pause and ask yourself what invisible pressure they might be under. Not as an excuse for them, but as a fact check. Most people are not the villain in their own story. They're just responding to circumstances you can't see. That tiny reframe softens the bias and opens room for actual understanding. Just world reasoning. Watch what happens when someone you know gets hurt or fails at something, and notice how quickly your brain offers an explanation. Not about bad luck or circumstance, but about what they must have done to deserve it. She got laid off, so she probably wasn't performing well enough. He got sick, so he must not have taken care of himself. A child was abused, so there was probably something about how they were raised. Your mind does this automatically, stitching together a story where the world makes perfect moral sense. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to people who somehow earn them. It feels safer that way, because it means you're in control. If you just make the right choices, bad things won't happen to you. The belief is seductive because it trades complexity for certainty, randomness for reason. Except that's not how the world works. And the moment you see this pattern firing in yourself, you'll spot it everywhere. In how we talk about poverty, in how we judge sick people, in how we treat refugees or anyone whose life has visibly cracked. The just world bias lets us blame the victim instead of feeling the weight of randomness and unfairness. And that's a deeply human thing to do, but it's also a trap that keeps us from seeing people clearly. Here's where it gets real. Your belief that suffering must be deserved directly affects how much compassion you allow yourself to feel. If someone's pain is their own fault, you don't owe them anything. If it's just the brutal spin of a coin, then you're closer to understanding what it means to be vulnerable yourself. The next time you catch yourself thinking, they must have done something to deserve that, pause and ask whether you're actually seeing their situation or whether you're just protecting yourself from the uncomfortable truth that bad things happen to people who don't deserve them, including, potentially, you. That discomfort you feel when you sit with that thought, that's the beginning of real clarity. Victim blaming reflex. Someone tells you they got mugged last night and your brain does something weird. It starts hunting for what they did wrong. Were they on their phone, walking alone, in the wrong neighborhood? And before you even realize it, you're quietly relieving yourself of the horror by deciding they made a mistake. If they'd been smarter, faster, more aware, it wouldn't have happened. This isn't cruelty. It's your nervous system trying to restore order to a chaotic world. If the victim caused it, then you have control. You just have to be smarter than they were. But here's what's happening beneath that impulse. You're taking a random, terrible event and converting it into a reassuring story where bad things happen to people who earned them. It's comforting. It makes the universe feel less random and you feel less vulnerable. The problem is that we do this constantly, and it compounds real harm. A woman gets assaulted, and we ask what she was wearing. A person gets laid off, and we assume they weren't performing. Someone gets sick, and we remember they weren't exercising enough. A teenager gets bullied, and we wonder if they tried hard enough to fit in. Each time, we're not just analyzing. We're protecting ourselves by building a wall between us and them, saying I would have done it differently, so I'm safe. What makes this particularly sticky is that victims do the same thing to themselves. You internalize the blame because it feels better than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen and there's nothing you could have done. You rewrite the story, so you're the author, not the victim. The next time you catch yourself hunting for what someone did wrong, try pausing there. Notice whether you're actually problem-solving or whether you're just trying to convince yourself it couldn't happen to you. That gap between analysis and reassurance is where victim blaming lives, and it thrives on that one lie we tell ourselves, that control makes us safe. Euphemism laundering. You walk into a budget meeting at work and hear the manager say, "We're right-sizing the team." Nobody flinches. If she'd said, "We're firing people," the room would feel different. The fear would be louder, the discomfort would be real. But wrap the same action in a softer word, and something shifts. The weight lifts just enough that the conversation can continue. That's euphemism laundering in its smallest form. Taking something hard to look at directly and dressing it up so we can pass by it without fully seeing what it is. The trick is that euphemisms aren't just ornamental. They're psychological filters. When a government calls civilian deaths collateral damage, the brain processes it differently than when someone says, "We killed people who weren't soldiers." When a company talks about making adjustments to the workforce, it doesn't land the same way as "we're destroying people's livelihoods." The words do actual work on your mind, dimming the moral clarity of what's happening. And that dimming spreads. Once the softer word enters the room, it becomes the official story. Everyone starts using it. The gentler language becomes the truth, at least the one we tell ourselves. The real danger isn't that we use nice words sometimes. It's when we use them to outsource our conscience. A lie told smoothly enough doesn't feel like a lie anymore. It becomes strategic communication or managing expectations. Cruelty becomes tough love. Exploitation becomes flexibility. Because the language itself is polite, the action feels justified. We've called it something acceptable, so it must be. Start noticing when language softens around something that would feel harder if you said its real name. That moment of linguistic flinching, when your mind reaches for the gentle word instead of the true one, is where laundering happens. The gap between what we do and what we call it is where discomfort hides, and that gap is worth looking at. Jargon as gatekeeping. You walk into a room where specialists are talking, doctors, lawyers, engineers, academics, and within 2 minutes, you stop understanding a word they're saying. Not because the ideas are actually complex, but because the language has become a wall. That wall is intentional, even if nobody explicitly built it. Jargon starts as efficiency, a shorthand for people who share deep knowledge, but it transforms into something else. A velvet rope dividing who's in and who's out. Most people who use jargon don't consciously gatekeep. They've just forgotten what it felt like not to know. A therapist says dysregulation instead of feeling overwhelmed. A programmer talks about state management when they mean organizing information. A consultant discusses stakeholder alignment when they really mean getting people on the same page. These terms compress meaning, yes, but they also create an invisible hierarchy. Those fluent in the language belong. Everyone else feels stupid, and stupidity is a powerful silencer. You stop asking questions. You nod. You accept that maybe you're just not smart enough for this world. The cruel irony is that jargon often obscures rather than clarifies. It gives the illusion of precision while hiding simple truths behind expensive-sounding words. Watch what happens when you ask an expert to explain their field to a 10-year-old. Most cannot do it cleanly. They've been inside the jargon bubble so long, they've lost touch with the ground truth. The real measure of understanding isn't how many technical terms someone can deploy. It's whether they can strip an idea down to its skeleton and still have it hold weight. So the next time someone speaks in language you don't understand, resist the urge to feel small. Ask them to translate. Demand the simple version. The person who can explain something plainly understands it better than the person who hides behind terminology. And that's a reliable filter for who actually knows what they're talking about versus who's learned to sound the part. Menu psychology of language. Restaurants have known this for decades, but you'll start noticing it everywhere the moment you see it. A restaurant calls something pan-seared branzino instead of grilled white fish, and suddenly the same thing costs $15 more. Same preparation, same heat, same fish, but the language made your brain see luxury instead of commodity before you even tasted it. Now expand that beyond menus. Your doctor doesn't say 90% of people survive this treatment, even though that's mathematically identical to 10% don't survive. One version feels hopeful, one feels like a warning. Same probability, different language, different emotional choice. Advertisers know that reduced fat sells better than contains fat, that initially priced at $120 hits differently than now $60. That limited time offer triggers urgency in a way sale doesn't. Your job interview goes better when you say, I led 3 projects, instead of 3 projects happened while I was there. The language doesn't change what happened. It changes how someone categorizes your role in it. Real estate agents learned decades ago that cozy moves faster than small, that rustic charm sells better than needs work. Here's the quiet part. You're not immune to this. You're using these frames on yourself right now. When you call procrastination self-protection, you feel less guilty. When you reframe a failed relationship as incompatibility, it stings less. When you tell yourself, I'm not motivated right now, instead of, I'm afraid, the story feels safer. The words you choose don't describe reality. They construct it. Every time you choose a particular frame, you reinforce the neural path for that frame, making it easier to travel that route next time. Start listening for it. Listen to how people describe the same events in completely different language, depending on who benefits from each version. Then notice what you're choosing to call things in your own life, in your own head, when no one's watching. The menu psychology of language doesn't just change other people's minds, it rewires yours, one word, choice at a time. Priming residue. You walk into a meeting after scrolling through news about inflation, and suddenly every question someone asks feels like it's about money, even the ones that aren't. Or you hear the word sick in a song, and for the next hour, every ache in your body feels more tender, more real. That ghost impression left behind is priming residue, and it shapes your world far longer than you realize. Your brain doesn't neatly file away the last thing you perceived and lock the door. Instead, it leaves the file open, hot, and ready to color everything that comes next. A researcher shows you words about aging, wrinkle, frail, elderly. And then you walk slower down the hallway. You weren't consciously thinking about being old. The words just left their fingerprints on how your body moved. It works backward too. Seeing images of money makes you more selfish in a negotiation. Watching a violent movie makes ambiguous social interactions feel more threatening. Reading about competence before a job interview changes which memories feel relevant. The trap is that you feel like you're reasoning freely in the moment. You have no sense of the invisible hand still steering from the last frame. And so you convince yourself the meeting was genuinely about finances, or that person really was kind of hostile, or you really do need to be more careful. You're narrating around the priming, not noticing it. The question that matters is simple. What was in your head before you formed this opinion? The practical move isn't to fight it. You can't unsee what you've seen. Instead, name the residue when you can. Before important conversations, pause and ask what you just consumed. What words, images, or stories were you swimming in 5 minutes ago? Sometimes that small acknowledgement is enough to loosen its grip and give your actual judgment some room to breathe. You'll never fully escape the echo, but catching it changes what the echo gets to decide. Barnum's statement acceptance. You walk into a coffee shop and a stranger hands you a card that says, "You have a strong capacity for both independence and collaboration." You nod. It feels right. It feels like they see you. That card is doing exactly what the Barnum effect does. It uses vague, universally true statements to make you feel like someone has diagnosed something real about your inner life. The trick is that it applies to almost everyone, but when you read it, you experience it as personal. Your brain treats the fuzzy and the specific as the same thing. A horoscope that says you're creative but sometimes doubtful lands like wisdom because it's true enough that you'll fill in the blanks with your own memories. You'll think of last Tuesday when you hesitated, and suddenly the horoscope predicted your exact week. What it actually did was hand you a skeleton, and you clothed it with your life. This happens with personality tests, fortune tellers, therapy speak, even job descriptions that promise to reveal your hidden strengths. You're drawn to them because they're broad enough to feel true and personal enough to feel seen. The Barnum effect thrives because we're pattern-matching creatures who desperately want to believe that someone or something understands us. And here's the real trap. Once you feel seen by a vague statement, you start trusting the vague source. If a personality quiz got you right, maybe it knows what job you should take. If a card reading felt true, maybe that reader knows what's coming. The confidence spreads like a stain. What begins as pattern matching becomes permission to outsource your judgment to whoever made you feel that first flutter of recognition. The way out isn't skepticism about everything. It's sahidar. It's asking a small, sharp question. Could this statement apply to most people? Would my complete opposite also nod and feel seen? That pause won't make you cynical, it'll just make you clear about who's actually paying attention to you and who's playing the percentages. Pseudo-profound receptivity. You sit across from someone who speaks slowly, pauses between sentences, and uses a lot of metaphors. There's something hypnotic about it. The cadence makes the words feel wise, even if you're not entirely sure what they mean. Maybe you nod, maybe you feel like you're learning something deep. That sense of depth you're experiencing is often not coming from the ideas themselves, but from the delivery. This is pseudo-profound receptivity, the strange human tendency to mistake vague, metaphor-heavy, or mysteriously phrased language for genuine insight. Your brain confuses the feeling of profundity with actual profundity. A statement abstract enough to apply to almost any human experience feels more true, more universal, more wise than one that's specific and checkable. Life is a journey, spoken with a long pause, lands differently in your mind than your career progression involves distinct phases. One sounds like wisdom, the other sounds like an observation. Both could be true, but only one makes you feel understood. The danger runs deeper than a wasted evening. We start surrounding ourselves with people who sound thoughtful without checking whether they're thinking clearly. Horoscopes work this way. Certain self-help gurus work this way. Even friends sometimes rely on it. The beautiful ambiguity that lets you project meaning onto their words and feel seen without being truly known. And here's where it gets tricky. The more pseudo-profound stuff you consume, the more your brain recalibrates what intelligence looks like. Clarity starts to feel shallow. Precision feels unimaginative. Actual nuance, the hard, specific kind, gets mistaken for vagueness from people who simply can't articulate. So next time you feel that little thrill of recognition listening to someone speak, pause. Ask yourself, do I understand this? Or does it just sound like I should? Ask them a follow-up question. Watch what happens when they have to be specific. Clarity and genuine insight can live together. Sometimes, the wisest thing is being clear enough that you could be proven wrong. Dunning-Kruger plateau. You know that person at work who confidently pitches an idea in 5 minutes that a specialist would spend weeks researching? They're not being reckless. They're living on the plateau. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't a cliff you fall off once you learn a little. It's a flat stretch that can last for months or even years. The moment you pick up basic competence in anything, coding, photography, investing, therapy speak, you hit a zone where your confidence feels absolutely bulletproof. You've seen enough to think you see everything. The gaps are invisible because you don't know what you're missing. And that's the plateau. Genuine knowledge just deep enough to feel like mastery, but still shallow enough to miss the actual depth. It lasts longer than most people expect. A weekend course makes you feel like a photographer. 3 months of trading makes you feel like an analyst. One book on psychology makes you start seeing disorders in everyone around you. The trap is that this plateau is comfortable. You're right about enough things to feel validated. You've got a framework that works on the surface. And the weird thing is, people on the plateau often sound more confident than the actual experts because they haven't yet met the part of the problem that humbles them. The plateau breaks, but only if you keep going. You have to push past the point where things still feel manageable into the territory where you realize how little you actually know. That's uncomfortable. Most people plateau out somewhere safe and stay there, confident forever. The antidote isn't more information. It's watching someone truly skilled work. Sit next to a genuine expert and watch how many tiny corrections, instincts, and contingencies they hold that nobody told you about. Watch how often they hesitate before moving. That hesitation is where the real knowledge lives. The plateau keeps you safe and stupid. Growth requires trading that safety for the vertigo of realizing how much farther down it goes. Imposter competence gap. You nail the presentation, the room claps, your boss pulls you aside afterward and says you crushed it. And in that moment, instead of relief, you feel a small tightening in your chest. A voice that says something like, they just didn't see through it yet. That gap between what you actually did and what your brain insists you faked is the imposter competence gap, and it grows wider the more talented you actually become. Here's the twist. The people who feel like frauds are usually not the ones faking it. They're the ones paying closest attention to what they don't know. A genuinely incompetent person doesn't see the gaps because they can't see the gaps. But you've learned enough to know how much remains invisible. Every new skill skill reveals 10 things you're still terrible at. Every accomplishment becomes proof that you got lucky, or that the bar was lower than you thought, or that next time they'll figure out you're just a person who reads books and repeats things. The gap feels real because it is real. You are not actually a master, but the trap is assuming that gap is evidence of fraud rather than evidence of growth. The gap exists in everyone who's actually learning. An expert in 2005 would look like an amateur to themselves in 2015 because their standards went up faster than their abilities did. Notice when you're doing this. When you minimize a win, when you credit luck instead of work, when you assume the next person to judge your work will finally see the truth. That's not humility. That's the competence gap talking, and it never goes away. It just means you're still growing. The move is not to believe you're qualified. It's to stop treating the gap as a sign you're a fraud and start treating it as a sign you're paying attention. The gap is the price of becoming someone worth listening to, and the fear that haunts you is really just growth casting a shadow. Curse of knowledge. You know how to tie your shoes. You learned it once, maybe at 5 or 6, and now your fingers just do it without your brain showing up for the meeting. That automatic knowing has a dark side nobody talks about. The moment you understand something deeply, you become almost unable to explain it to someone who doesn't. You skip steps. You use jargon you don't realize is jargon. You forget what confusion feels like. A surgeon watches a medical student fumble through an explanation and gets impatient because the path from problem to solution feels so obvious to her hands and mind that she can't remember the fog. A parent gets frustrated when their kid doesn't grasp math that everyone knows. A programmer explains a bug fix in 3 sentences and wonders why nobody's following. A teacher assumes that concept you've taught 100 times doesn't need the slow build anymore. This is the curse of knowledge. You've traveled the road so many times that the landmarks become invisible to you. The detours aren't memorable anymore because you don't take them. What once took you weeks of confusion now takes your intuition 5 seconds, and you've accidentally erased the map of how you got there. The strangest part is that it feels like the other person is being slow, when really you've just become too close to the material to see it fresh. Your expertise has made you a terrible tour guide through the very thing you know best. The fix isn't complicated, but it requires deliberate work. You have to actively imagine confusion. Ask yourself what you assumed without noticing. Walk through the basics like they matter. Retrace your own learning. When you catch yourself getting impatient with someone's question, pause and ask yourself what gap you've forgotten exists. That question transforms you from frustrated expert to someone who can actually teach. It's the difference between knowing and being able to show someone else the way in. Illusion of explanatory depth. You probably think you understand how a zipper works. Close your eyes and describe it. Be specific. The teeth, the slider, how the fabric interlocks. Now actually, go look at one. Slow it down. Try to trace exactly what's happening in that tiny metal mechanism. Something shifts, doesn't it? That gap between confident explanation and actual mechanism is where most of us live, most of the time. We don't understand nearly as much as we think we do, and we're rarely aware of the difference until someone asks us to actually teach it. This is the illusion of explanatory depth, and it runs so deep that we've built entire arguments, careers, and belief systems on it. You hold an opinion about economics, or medicine, or why your coworker behaves the way they do. Ask yourself to explain it in real detail, not the polished version you've rehearsed, but the mechanics, the evidence, the actual causal chains. Most certainty collapses here. We mistake familiarity with a topic for understanding of a topic. We've heard the story enough times that it feels solid, even though we couldn't construct it from scratch if pressed. The danger accelerates when stakes climb higher. You're confident about how someone else should raise their kids, or manage their health, or navigate their grief, because you've thought about it. But have you thought about the actual complicating details, the variables you're not tracking, the ways your own experience is making you blind to what others see? Here's what makes this pattern so sticky. Recognizing it doesn't cure it. You'll spot it in others constantly now, and miss it in yourself regularly. The real move isn't claiming deeper knowledge or pretending certainty you don't own. It's getting comfortable with the smaller, more honest radius of what you actually know well, and staying genuinely curious about everything beyond that edge. That posture, that willingness to admit the boundary, is not weakness. It's the opposite of false confidence, and it's rarer than you'd think. Overconfidence in narratives. You know that moment when someone tells you a story about why a relationship ended, why they didn't get the job, why their boss is out to get them, and the story is so smooth, so complete, that it feels like the whole truth. They might even believe it completely. But here's what's happening beneath that polished account. They're not remembering events. They're remembering the last version of the story they told themselves, which is a slightly different thing. Every retelling hardens it a little more, adds detail, rounds out the edges, makes the narrative feel inevitable and airtight. The human brain doesn't store memories like video files. It reconstructs them each time, and each reconstruction is an opportunity to unconsciously edit, to make sense of chaos by imposing order that might not have been there. Then something strange happens. The more coherent the story becomes, the more confident we feel that we're seeing things clearly. We mistake narrative smoothness for truth. A person can be genuinely convinced they saw the betrayal coming, that all the signs were there, that they always knew something was off. But go back to their actual journal entries or texts from that time, and you often find genuine surprise, hope, confusion. The story they tell now has already rewritten that uncertainty out. This matters because overconfidence in your own narrative can trap you in ways you don't always notice. It can make you dismiss people who experience the same events differently, as if their version is simply wrong rather than differently constructed. It can make you resist new information that doesn't fit the shape of your story. The move here isn't to doubt everything you remember. It's to hold your narrative lightly, like a story rather than a law. Notice when a story feels too neat, when all the pieces fit a little too perfectly. Notice when you're more certain about someone's motives than maybe you should be. Ask yourself, what version of this was I telling myself 6 months ago? The gaps between those versions are where growth lives. Hindsight, inevitability. You make a choice on Tuesday that feels genuinely open. Flip a coin, pick left or right, say yes or no. There are real reasons it could go either way. But then 6 months later, when things fall apart, you're sitting with a friend and the words come out, "I always knew that wouldn't work." Or your friend says it to you and the confidence lands like a stone. They didn't know. You didn't know, but now the past feels like it had only one possible ending, and you feel stupid for not seeing it coming. This is hindsight inevitability. The brain's tendency to reshape memories of uncertainty into certainty, to rewrite the past as obviously inevitable. It happens because your mind is obsessed with coherence. Once an outcome is real, your brain scrambles to fit all the prior facts into a story where that outcome was the only logical destination. The contradictory evidence, the genuine maybe moments, the equal odds, they get edited out or dimmed. What survives is the narrative where you should have known. Your memory doesn't just store what happened, it reorganizes the whole world backward from the ending. Here's why it matters. Hindsight inevitability corrupts how you learn. You don't actually reflect on the decision-making process that got you there. Instead, you blame yourself for missing an obviousness that wasn't obvious at the time. That eats away at confidence in future choices. It also makes you harsher on others. A friend's failed relationship, a colleague's bad business call, a political prediction that didn't pan out all compress into stupidity, because now it all looks inevitable. The quiet move is to catch yourself saying, "I always knew," and pause. Ask, what didn't I know then? What looked possible? What would have convinced past me the other direction was smarter? That small archaeology, digging back into genuine uncertainty, teaches you more than the rewritten story ever will. It also softens how you judge the people you love. Peak end memory editing. You finish a meal that started bland, improved halfway through, and ended with perfect dessert. 3 weeks later, you tell someone it was incredible. You're not lying. You genuinely remember it that way. Your brain didn't store a full film of the experience. Instead, it kept highlights, the peak moment, and how it finished. Everything in the middle got compressed, edited, almost erased. This is peak end memory editing, and it runs your life in ways you don't notice until you start watching for it. A concert where the opening felt flat, but the final song left you breathless, becomes brilliant in memory, even though you spent most of the time bored. A relationship that was pleasant for years, but ended badly, warps in your mind. Your brain tells a story where unhappiness was always there, where the warning signs were obvious all along. The inverse works too. A terrible event with a good ending becomes oddly tolerable in your memory. A painful medical procedure that ends gently feels less traumatic in hindsight than it was in the moment. A difficult conversation that resolves becomes a memory of resolution, not an hour of tension. Here's the trap. Knowing this doesn't automatically protect you from it. You can't just tell yourself to remember the whole thing and override how memory actually works. But you can use it anyway. If you're designing an experience you want someone to remember fondly, A conversation, a date, a project, a performance. Engineer that peak and that ending. The middle will fade. Make sure what sticks is what matters. And when you review your own year or your own day, remember this: the way you remember it is not the way it was. It's the way your brain chose to keep it. That's not a flaw in how you work. It's often a survival tool that keeps you from drowning in every small moment. The trade-off is that you're living in edited reruns of your own life, and sometimes those edits change the plot entirely. Duration neglect. You've probably noticed this in yourself. A 30-minute traffic jam feels catastrophic in the moment, but ask you a week later and you can barely recall it. A 2-hour flight delay, though, that lodges itself in your memory like something permanent happened. The difference isn't about actual time. It's about what your brain decides to store and wait. Duration neglect is the strange habit of letting how long something lasts barely influence how much you feel about it or how much you later remember. Your emotional intensity comes completely untethered from the clock. A brief, vivid hurt can sting harder than weeks of low-grade stress. A 10-minute conversation that felt truly connected can matter more than hours spent in the same room with someone where nothing real was said. A single brilliant joke at a party can outlive the entire evening in your mind. This matters because it shapes how you spend your life without you realizing it. You might sit through a full movie night that bores you numb because you've already invested the time, but skip a shorter activity that would actually bring you joy. Your brain doesn't calculate, "Is this worth my evening?" It calculates, "How much did this hurt or matter in real time?" and then forgets the duration entirely. This is why people stay too long in situations that don't serve them. The accumulated hours blur together into a vague sense of obligation or duty. Meanwhile, brief moments of genuine connection or unexpected beauty get locked into long-term memory with perfect clarity. When you're making a choice right now, duration feels crucial. It's only an hour, or it takes forever. But your future self won't weight things the same way. A few seconds of something truly good might matter more than a full evening of acceptable or fine. The real move is noticing when you're letting the clock do your thinking and asking instead what actually sticks with people, what they're still talking about years later. That's rarely the thing that took the longest. Rosy retrospection. Think back to a trip that stressed you out in the moment, the flights that ran late, the hotel that looked nothing like the photos, the argument you had halfway through. Now picture yourself telling that story to someone a year later. Somehow the trip has become the best vacation ever. The delays feel like funny anecdotes. The argument barely registers. Your brain has quietly edited the whole experience, turning pain into nostalgia and frustration into flavor. That rewriting is rosy retrospection, and it happens to you more than you probably realize. Your brain doesn't preserve memories like a video file. It reconstructs them every time you recall them. And each reconstruction smooths the rough edges, softens the discomfort, and amplifies the good parts. The harder moments fade faster than the punchlines. The worry evaporates. What stays is the edited version, the highlight reel you tell yourself and others. This sounds harmless until you realize how it shapes your decisions. You remember your last job as better than it was, so you stay too long at your current one, waiting for something that might never materialize. You recall your ex through a haze of warm memories instead of the actual daily friction, then wonder why the fantasy keeps pulling you back. You remember the risky decision that eventually worked out as a moment of bold wisdom, conveniently forgetting the panic. This matters because rosy retrospection is your mind's way of protecting you, of turning suffering into meaning, chaos into story. But it also means you're making future choices based on a version of the past that never quite happened. The real trap isn't the good feeling itself, it's that you stop asking whether the good feeling is based on what actually occurred. Try this. Before you conclude a chapter was great or terrible, write down what you actually felt then, not what you feel now remembering it. That gap between the lived experience and the edited memory is where your clearest judgment lives. Focusing illusion. Right now, whatever is taking up your mental real estate feels like it matters more than it actually does. You're worried about an email you sent 3 hours ago, and your brain has spent the time building a whole catastrophe around it. A conversation that probably won't happen, a judgment that probably won't land. Meanwhile, the person who received it has already moved on to something else entirely. They're not thinking about you nearly as much as you're thinking about you. And the weird part is, you know this, yet your mind keeps returning to that one focal point, like it's the only thing in the universe. That's the focusing illusion. The way your attention distorts your sense of importance. What makes it stick is that whatever you're focusing on genuinely does matter to you in that moment. But the illusion is thinking that intensity of focus equals actual weight in the world. You land a job and believe your life has transformed forever. And it has, a little bit, but 6 months in, you'll be just as happy or unhappy as you were before, because your baseline resets. You lose something and feel like you'll never recover. You win something and feel like everything is different. None of these are lies exactly. They're just distorted by the telescope of your attention. The trap deepens because when you're focused, you're terrible at remembering what other things used to matter. You can't imagine the future where this current crisis is background noise, so you make decisions from inside the illusion. You overstress, over-prepare, over-ruminate, as if the intensity of focus is proportional to the actual stakes. The next move isn't to flatten everything into nothing. It's simpler. When you feel the pull of that singular focal point, try asking what you'd advise a friend about the same thing, or what you'll honestly think about it in 3 months. Not to dismiss your concern, but to borrow the perspective your attention has temporarily stolen from you. Impact bias forecasting. You know that feeling when you imagine a future event so vividly, a promotion, a breakup, a failure, that you can almost taste the emotions it will bring. Your brain runs the movie, and you feel certain that this moment will crack open your life and change everything forever. Here's what research keeps showing. You're almost always wrong about how much you'll actually feel it, not wrong about what will happen, wrong about how much it will matter once it lands. This is impact bias, the tendency to overestimate how intensely and how long we'll feel the emotional consequences of future events. You imagine losing that job and see yourself crushed for months, unable to function, your whole identity shattered. What actually happens? You're miserable for a few days, then something shifts. You start problem solving. You find yourself laughing at lunch with a friend. 6 months later, you barely remember the texture of that fear. The trap isn't that you're pessimistic or optimistic. It's that you're theatrical. Your mind zooms in on the event itself and forgets that you, the actual you, the one who gets bored, who laughs at stupid things, who moves through days with 1,000 micro distractions, will keep living. You have resilience you can't imagine from where you're standing right now. You have adaptation built into your nervous system. Joy doesn't vanish just because something bad happened. Boredom doesn't stop just because something good happened. The practical move here is almost boring in its simplicity. When you're forecasting the weight of a future event, ask yourself what you were doing 6 months ago that you've already forgotten. Ask what you found yourself laughing about when you thought you wouldn't. Then scale back your emotional prediction by about half. Not because you're being Pollyanna, because the person you are, the one who forgets, who adapts, who moves through time like everyone else, is stronger at surviving than your current imagination lets you see. Effective forecasting errors. You know that feeling when you imagine a future moment so vividly that your stomach tightens. The promotion you'll finally get, the way your ex will regret losing you, the beach house you'll buy, the crushing shame if you fail that presentation. Your brain is doing what it thinks is preparation, painting the emotional landscape ahead so you're never caught off guard. Except there's a problem. Your emotional weather forecast is almost always wrong. And not in small ways. When you land that promotion, you feel relief for maybe 3 days. The joy evaporates and your baseline mood clicks back to exactly where it was. You remember imagining months of triumph. Instead, you feel like yourself, just with more responsibilities. This gap between the emotional intensity you predict and what you actually experience is effective forecasting error. We systematically overestimate how much future events will matter to us, how long the feeling will last, and how much it will dominate our inner life. The breakup you thought would wreck you for a year, your brain adapted by month 4, often without you even noticing. The dream vacation you saved for, the memories fade faster than you believed possible. We're astonishingly bad at predicting how quickly we'll stop feeling things so acutely, how the sharp edge dulls into something manageable. Here's what makes this dangerous. You make decisions today based on emotional forecasts you can't trust. You stay in situations because you're scared of sadness you'll probably adjust to. You chase achievements because you overestimate their emotional payoff. You avoid risks because you imagine regret as permanent rather than a temporary sting that fades with time. The antidote isn't to ignore your predictions. It's to hold them lighter, to treat them like sketches instead of blueprints. Ask yourself not just how will I feel, but how will I feel about this in 6 months? That tiny shift in time frame can completely rewrite your decision-making. The sting fades. The baseline holds. You're more resilient than you think, more adaptable than your anxious imagination allows. The spotlight illusion. You're walking into a room and you trip slightly on the edge of a rug. Your face goes hot. You glance around convinced everyone saw the stumble, that they're replaying it in their heads, maybe even judging you for it. But here's what actually happened. Most people didn't notice. The few who did have already moved on, and yet your brain is running the clip on loop like it's the most notable moment of the afternoon. That gap between what you think people are watching and what they're actually focused on is the spotlight illusion, and it shapes your entire social life without you knowing. The mechanism is dead simple. Your own experience feels enormous to you because you live inside it. You're hyper-aware of every awkward pause you make, every hair out of place, every word that lands weird, so your mind assumes others are equally tuned to you because your vantage point feels like the center of the universe. But everyone else is running the same trick in reverse. They're consumed by their own stumbles, their own perceived failures, their own internal theater. You barely register on their radar because they're too busy worrying that you're judging them. This matters because it's quietly running your choices. You skip raising your hand in a meeting because you believe everyone will think your question is dumb. You avoid starting a conversation because you're sure people find you boring. You replay an offhand comment you made days ago and cringe, certain it created some lasting impression. Meanwhile, the other people involved have genuinely forgotten it happened. They're not rewatching your moments. They're anxious about their own. The escape hatch is small, but real. Next time you're convinced everyone noticed something about you, ask yourself what you can remember about what 3 people around you wore yesterday. The fact that you probably can't remember is the same fact they can't remember about you. Once you feel that mismatch a few times, the spotlight starts to dim.